notes. For good sound quality, it is important for members to speak clearly with some volume. Soft voices may be heard but hard to understand. The microphones in the room pick up sound very well, and we need to be careful with outside conversations. And the computer will be operated remotely by staff to mute if we take a break. As to this morning, the sign-in sheet stopped accepting new entries for people who wanted to speak at 8 a.m. the day of the committee hearing. If you sign in after that time, the committee will not have your name before them. However, the chair will provide an opportunity for you to speak after all registered names are called. At that time, we ask you to raise your hand to be organized. The sign-in sheet actually closes for purposes of registering your opinion at 11:59 on the day of the hearing. The one public hearing we have this morning, we actually have the most people signed up to speak that we have had for any public hearing this year in election law. So we will be putting a time limit on the majority of testimony that is before the committee. As to today, as chair of the House Election Law Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a public hearing on bills referred to the committee and scheduled to the House calendar for today. And as noticed, an executive session will be occurring on all bills remaining referred to the committee. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has the ability to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in the meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this meeting does comply with House rules and RSA 91A, and anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.nh.us. And in the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes during this meeting will be done by roll call. And before we start the roll call for attendance, I ask you to join me in a pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible.
and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll call attendance.
Representative Bergeron.
I am present. I'm participating remotely from my home in Nashua. There is no one in the room with me at the present time.
Thank you. Representative Berry.
Present in Concord.
Representative Cody.
Here in Nashua, alone.
Representative Freitas.
Representative Freitas, I know I've seen you.
Muted.
Are you muted? Representative.
It's here. Okay.
I'm unmuted now, thank you. I'm at home in Manchester alone.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Madam Chair.
Present.
Representative Groen. Representative Hamblett.
I am present in my home in Portsmouth and my son is in another room.
Thank you. Representative Hamer.
I'm present in Manchester in my home alone.
Representative Hayward.
Present here in Concord.
Representative Lane.
I'm present in my home office in Concord and I'm alone in the office. My husband is in the house.
Representative McDonald.
Present at the committee room in Concord.
Representative Mooney.
Here at the LOB.
Representative Muirhead.
Present in Hanover, New Hampshire alone.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Jerry Concord.
Representative Quayle.
Here in Concord.
Representative Sandler.
I'm home in my home office in Somersworth. My husband and our cats are in the living room. That's all of us there are.
Representative Sweeney.
Here.
Representative Terosian.
I'm present here, in Concord, at the LOB.
Representative Ward,
Here in Portsmouth, one family member in the house.
and the clerk is here. Okay, all set.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have one hearing today, one hearing scheduled to be heard today on non-germane amendment to Senate Bill 89. The prime sponsor of that is the chairman of our committee, Representative Barbara Griffin of Goffstown. I'd like to recognize Representative Griffin for the purposes of introducing this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to members of the House Electric Committee. My name is Barbara Griffin, and I'm a fourth-term representative from Goffstown, and I come before you today to introduce Amendment 1445H to Senate Bill 89. This amendment was prepared at my request in order to address what I consider to be a direct assault on the sovereignty of New Hampshire and its ability to conduct its elections. This amendment provides that should our federal government pass the For the People Act of 2021, it will have no effect on the conduct of New Hampshire elections for state and county officers. That particular language was selected to cover both constitutional officers and those permitted under statute. I know that some of you are wondering why such an amendment would be offered when the act, which is known as HR 1, now S1, reportedly only affects elections and voting for federal offices of the Congress. It is offered for two reasons. The first is to oppose this large expansion of federal governments. While some say the federal government has the right to govern federal elections, legal scholars dispute the breadth of that authority. And I read the Constitution to give primary authority for elections to the state, but allow Congress to make or alter such regulations. And it is that regulatory authority which is being interpreted as expansively as possible to override what states currently provide. The second reason is because history tells us that this legislation will not just affect federal offices. Both the National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act were to address federal office. Yes, both of those became major state issues. New Hampshire received an exemption from those acts, but the possibility of receiving an exemption from the S1 at this time, given the implementation date proposed, and the fact the bill restricts jurisdiction for disputes over the act to the Washington, D.C. District Court only, makes an exemption unlikely. Oh, and by the way, Washington, D.C. will become a state. I have with me a copy of the For the People's Act of 2021. It is over 800 pages addressing voting, campaign financing, and ethics. While all important issues in election, I speak today to some of the provisions regarding voting and how it will affect New Hampshire. S1 eliminates voter ID requirements. Over 75% of Americans support voter ID requirements, and the majority of our residents support it, and we have such a law. It will no longer be applicable if S1 passes. So what do we do? Keep the law on the books. S1 provides for the registration of persons at the age of 16, a proposal heard by this committee in prior years and rejected by the people's representatives. S1 has automatic voter online registration with opt-out provisions, not opt-in, a proposal heard by this committee in the legislature in recent years and rejected. This will be a major change in the providing of services at all levels of our state and communities. It will be at great cost. And while there is money that is allegedly associated with the act, who knows how much it would be? It will have to be applied for. A grant process will have to be gone through. And if awarded and accepted, it is contingent on unspecified terms and conditions of the federal government. S1 has voting that occurs over weeks. It's in direct opposition to our Constitution, which provides that we have an election day, and on that day, the votes are to be counted and the results are to be publicly declared by the moderator at each polling place on the night after the election closes. With S1, our communities will have to begin to allow voting at least 15 days before before Election Day, and then continue to receive absentee ballots for 10 days after Election Day. Our elections are run in New Hampshire in our communities by our clerk, elected moderators, and supervisors with volunteers. How is this process going to be managed in your community? How will it be staffed? How will it be paid for? S1 also provides that polling places need to remain open for at least 10 hours a day during the early voting period and 12 hours on Election Day. Our minimum hours in New Hampshire are 8 hours, pursuant to RSA 659-4. What about small communities that can't count paper ballots with polling places that are open for less than an hour? RSA 659-3A provides for the early closing of polls in Dixville Notch and Hart's Location and Millsville. Will those communities have to provide for weeks of voting and be open for such extended hours? S1 also provides for no excuse absentee voting. Our Constitution doesn't have such a provision, and after 3 attempts to change the Constitution, you still are supposed to have a disability in order to vote absentee. The broad exemption of November 2020 does not apply in future elections. It was a specific emergency order that is no longer applicable. And additionally, it was still not no excuse absentee voting. Do we charge our election officials if S1 passes to run our elections in direct violation of our Constitution? S1 requires the mailing of an application for an absentee voter for all voters on a checklist 60 days prior to the election. It requires prepayment for mailings out and from potential voters, and it requires drop boxes to be available 45 days before elections for ballot drop-off. Our communities are going to pay for those items. Most communities have started to work on their budget for next year. How is that going to be paid for? And the ballot drop box procedure is one that has been considered and rejected by the New Hampshire legislature. Not only have these processes and procedures been considered and rejected by this committee over the years, some of them were considered by the New Hampshire Superior Court just last year. Many of the provisions, such as unmanned drop boxes, no excuse absentee voting, prepaid mailings, extended hours, extended days, were brought forward in 2020 with litigation brought by the American Federation of Teachers as the primary plaintiff, who asked that the court order the state to implement those provisions in 2020. That request was rejected in the Superior Court. The court recognized that our processes and procedures were appropriate in light of our Constitution and state laws. New Hampshire has a process for election that has worked for our communities. Do some people think changes can be made? Yes. Does that require upending the entire process that has been adopted and prescribed by our Constitution? No. In April 2020, the UNH Survey Center released polling data that provided that 90% of our voters said it was easy or somewhat easy to vote, and they were overwhelmingly confident in the processing of the election, ballots, and results. New Hampshire has placed in the top 3 of all states in voter participation rates for the last 4 presidentials. Some say this amendment will cause us to have 2 elections, and I disagree. This amendment is only making clear what proponents of S1 say is the case. It affects voting for federal offices only. It is S1 that is forcing the states, if they need to have 2 election processes, not this amendment. As to how to implement voting next year, should S1 pass, it will remain up to our chief election officer and the legislature at that time as to how to govern, as it always has. But pending that, it should not be directed to our state. I present to you that S1 will have a dramatic and unconstitutional impact on our elections. And I strongly disagree with our sitting senator, who has said that it really doesn't change the way New Hampshire would run its elections. I choose to give us an opportunity to chart a course that will allow us to conduct our elections in a manner that has produced the high voter participation rates, confidence in the conduct, and a process that voters find easy to navigate. And if you're concerned about the impact of S1, for this amendment, I suggest you call the federal delegation. While 2 members of our federal delegation have already voted for it, 2 still have the opportunity to stand in Washington in support of our New Hampshire voters and our New Hampshire Constitution. They should be voting no on S1, but I ask that you vote yes on 1445. That is what the amendment as proposes to do. I want to thank the committee for their time and listening to my testimony. Given the amount of people who have signed up to speak on this bill, as I suspected will be other people, maybe 1 or 2 questions if committee members have any, but I think the time will be best left for the public.
Okay, any questions for Representative Griffin?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Representative O'Brien.
You brought up our senators and they approve of this, and I've noticed a difference in people that have been involved in New Hampshire politics that have also been on this committee and have looked at election issues closely. Are you aware of, I know that our senators, were former governors and prior to that former state representatives. Are you aware of them ever serving on this committee? Anyone in our delegation that's approving of S1 right now?
I am not aware. Thank you. I'm going to remain, committee members, I'm going to remain seated on the side so that Representative McDonald can operate as chair for the remaining balance of the committee. Here, public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Griffin. As Representative Griffin indicated when she opened this meeting, we do have the largest number of people signed up to testify of any bill we've considered so far this session. Accordingly, we are going to impose a 3-minute time limit on anybody testifying. We're going to strictly enforce this 3-minute time limit. Representative Maureen Mooney is kind enough to be reminding me when we down to the last 30 seconds. I will so notify the person testifying to that, and I will have to ask you to stop your testimony at the end of the 3 minutes. But you will get a 30-second notice. And with that, we'll go to the first person to testify, and that is Senator James Gray.
I don't see Senator Gray in the list, Mr. Chairman. If he would raise his hand if he's there, but I do not.
Where is?
All right, Senator Gray apparently is not with us.
No.
Then I would like to move on to Representative Manuel Esticio for 3 minutes.
All right, I'm moving him over.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for having me today. I'm here to testify against this non-germane amendment for SB 89. And for me, basically, the For the People Act is a critical reform package, to get dark money out of politics, something that has bipartisan support. Stop billionaires from buying elections, crack down on corruption and partisan gerrymandering, protect the freedom to vote, and ensure elections are safe and accurate and accessible. And the For the People Act is essential to restoring the public's faith in our democratic institutions and ensuring everyone's voice and vote is heard, counted, and protected. And so today's hearing, I think, I'm just going to say, I think is a political stunt, nothing more. It is an attempt to spread misinformation and undermine our democracy. And as a young leader in our state, I hear it constantly how broken our government is. I mean, I've heard elected leaders say that we can't even trust our own government. And it's just ignoring the clear, unworkable nature of this proposal. And by that, I mean, I have, creating 2 separate systems. It is disturbing to me that some of my colleagues would go to such great lengths to just target one piece of legislation. So we should be working on implementing things like electronic poll books, online voter registration, not wasting our time on this silly amendment. I think, for us, this SB 89 is actually a bipartisan bill, and it's a pro-voter bill that would actually improve our absentee ballot pre-processing process and curing. So I think, as it is a good bill, but adding this amendment would be detrimental to this bill. And then I would also add that I respect the chair of the committee, but I would also say that New Hampshire was not in the top 3 in last year's election turnout. States like, I think it was Maine, Colorado, I think it was Minnesota that was Minnesota were the highest last year. So although we like to tell ourselves that we are an active participant, we're in the top 10 every 4 years. But like these states are taking measures to actually improve access to the ballot box, and we should be doing the same. So, and I'll end with saying that this bill would not immediately happen overnight. This isn't like we're automatically everything changes. There are provisions in the in HR1 and S1 that would make it so, there would be timelines that you wouldn't have, that we would be putting in. I'll end my testimony there.
Thank you, Representative Speicher. Any questions for Representative Speicher? Yes, Representative Hayward. I'm sorry, Representative Sherwood, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm Peter.
Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. Please help me understand, because I couldn't quite see it, how this, HR1 and S1, by relaxing voter ID requirements and other requirements that help to ensure voter integrity. Tell me how that gets rid of dark money in politics. I'm confused on that. Maybe you can enlighten me on how that does that.
I mean, this isn't thank you for the question. This isn't just one piece. I mean, voting is, elections are not just comprised of one specific act. This is 100%. This is, there are many parts to it. So in my view, making sure that we have, that we have transparent elections and seeing how much, seeing how candidates are funded is incredibly important to our electorate. Now, I don't think, I think voter ID will, making sure that people have access to the right to vote is a whole other part of this. But, transparency in how our electeds get funded is another important part of our election system. But like I said, it's not just, elections aren't just one thing. They're comprised of many different variables that go into elections. As you probably had to raise money, but you also had to turn people out when we all got elected. So, and you probably told folks to just remember to show up with the necessary requirements for voting. But it's nothing in this, as we all like to do in New Hampshire. We don't like to be siloed off. There are many different aspects to this. So.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chairman, but I've gotten some reports from members that are accessing the meeting by Zoom that it's difficult to hear the people in the committee room. If you could just be mindful of where the microphones are and make sure you're near one when you're speaking, it would be helpful.
Yes, can they hear me okay, or?
I think it's a little soft. I mean, I can call for tech support to come turn things up. If you're near a mic, it doesn't really sound like you are.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. You had a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for taking the follow-up question. Representative, are you aware of any voter in New Hampshire in the last election that wanted to vote that wasn't given the chance to vote either by absentee ballot or in vote balloting? Are you aware of any specific instances of that happening in New Hampshire?
So yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've heard of people being turned away for being able to register to vote because of misinformation that the registrant was given. There was, like, for example, there were newly naturalized citizens who were being told, oh, like, you need to have your exact date of when your naturalization was, and person, it's an important day in their lives, but not everybody remembers that day. And because they didn't have it, they were told, oh, you can't register. And because of that, they were denied their right to vote. You can't be given an absentee ballot, an affidavit if you're not a registered voter, and if you can't get registered. So there were situations like that. I know that we have, we're all trying our best because, a lot of us we're conducting this democracy as best we can. But, I wouldn't say that there is, I appreciate the affidavit process, but it's not as clear and cut as we all like to think it is.
Any other questions for Representative Vespucci? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Next signed up to testify is Representative Amanda Toll. Representative Toll.
And if she could just raise her hand, it would be helpful. Thank you. Here she is. And Representative McDonald, it's still a little difficult to hear you.
Honorable, can you hear me?
Yes.
You're fine, yes.
Honorable members of the House Election Law Committee, my name is Amanda Elizabeth Toll, and I represent Cheshire 16, which encompasses the city of Keene at large. I'm here to testify against the anti-For the People amendment to SB 89. It is nothing but a voter suppression tactic guised as a concern about the very popular For the People Act. The support for the provisions in the For the People Act are widespread because people want to restore faith in democratic institutions and assure that everyone's voice is heard. The amendment before you today, by creating separate elections and procedures for state and county elections, will do the opposite. It will make it harder and more confusing for people to vote and disenfranchise folks across the board, but especially those who are already more vulnerable to disenfranchisement, including our state's young people. As a representative for Keene, many of my constituents are college students at Keene State College and Antioch University. These are young folks who may be voting for just the first or second time and will be more likely to be confused and hampered by two separate sets of elections and registration procedures. We want young people to be greeted warmly into the democratic system so they will be lifelong voters and contributors to our civic life, not turned away by red tape to become cynical disbelievers in our system of elections. Finally, as a state rep who is also going through the budget process right now, it is important to note that the provisions in this amendment will likely cost money to implement. As we know, the budget is already incredibly lean and does not fund the critical social services needed by Granite Staters. To instead spend money on anti-democratic voter suppression procedures is an affront to Granite Staters and not in the best interests of my constituents or any of the citizens of New Hampshire. Thank you for hearing my testimony. I will not be taking questions today.
Thank you, Representative Toll.
Wow.
Next signed up to testify is Mr. Paul Fay. Mr. Fay, are you with us?
I'm sorry, who were you calling on?
Paul Fay.
Paul LaFabe.
Paul
If he could raise his hand, we do have Dave Scanlon and Tim Horrigan, Representative Horrigan with their hands up.
Okay, apparently Mr. Fay is not with us.
I do not see Mr. Fay.
You just hear fine? Okay, Secretary Deputy Scanlon, would you like to testify?
I've just promoted him.
Thank you. Deputy Scanlon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was able to get on. Mr. Chairman, before I start, I would like to say that Secretary Gardner was interested in testifying before the committee today. Unfortunately, he had a long-standing commitment with an essay contest winners that were involved with essays involving the presidential primary. Today was the awards ceremony before the Governor Council, and he is currently attending that. Madam Chair may be interested to know that the winner was a 14-year-old from Goffstown, and that person is getting their award as we speak. With that, he has asked me to testify on behalf of the office, and we are appearing in support of the amendment sponsored by Representative Griffin. HR 1 or SR S1, from our standpoint, is a federal takeover of a state's election process. And after reading through the bill in its entirety, it is quite clear that if S1 were to pass, it would change every area of our election process. And really, it would not be recognizable in the future compared to what we have today. And I think Representative Griffin did a great job explaining some of the things that were in the bill, but the bill is far more comprehensive than that. Just a general statement before we start. The election process has to work for all voters. And there is a delicate balance that we have to find between making sure that it's easy to vote and also making sure that the vote is secure, that we reduce the risk as much as possible for fraud to take place. The other side of that is, we don't want to enact policies that result in voter suppression. If we go too far in either direction, then we have a vast group of voters who lose confidence in the election because, number one, they either believe voter suppression is taking place, or the other side of that is that fraud is rampant because it's too easy for people to get on the checklist and exercise their right to vote. So from an administrative standpoint, we approach this with trying to find that balance where the laws that we enact are adequate enough so that the most people, as reasonably possible, have confidence that their vote is going to be counted and that it is not unduly burdensome for them to cast that vote. Just jumping over to HR 1 quickly, the title of the act, and I'm referring to HR 1 because our office did a briefing with the local election officials. We put together a PowerPoint, and Madam Chair, I believe that you have a copy of that you may be able to make available to members of the committee if the committee members do not already have that. But I would point out that the title of the act is to expand Americans' access to the ballot box, reduce the influence of big money in politics, strengthen ethics rules for public servants, and other anti-corruption measures for the purpose of fortifying our democracy and for other purposes. That sounds great. And I think that is a general statement that we should all strive for. The act itself, as was mentioned earlier, is very broad and addresses a number of very large topics. It's broken down into divisions. Division A is related to voting. Division B is related to campaign finance, and Division C is related to ethics. Again, a different subject matter. Our comments are related to Division A, which is the voting portion of this. And when we talk about Division A, there are things in that bill that are good. I mean, we're not going to deny that there are some things in that legislation that New Hampshire already does, like same-day voter registration. There are provisions in there that deal with electronic poll books, online voter registration portals, and increased accessible voting opportunities for individuals with disabilities. And those are all areas that our office is currently working on with the input of the legislature. There are bills, pieces of legislation moving through our state legislature that deal with those topics that we are supportive of. And we expect that in the near future, we're going to be implementing some of those provisions. But as we get into further into the bill, there are statements of findings made by Congress. And on page 20 of HR 1, Congress has made the finding that states and localities have eroded access to the right to vote through restrictions on the right to vote, including excessively onerous voter identification requirements, burdensome voter registration procedures, voter purges, limited and unequal access to voting by mail, polling place closures, unequal distribution of election resources, and other impediments. And I would challenge any member of this committee or the legislature to point to one of those areas that is problematic in the state of New Hampshire.
Deputy Scanlon, kind of wrap up.
I'm sorry.
If you could start wrapping up a little bit, we have a lot list here.
Okay.
Great stuff.
Okay. Much of the material I would go over is in that PowerPoint. The pages from that are taken directly from the text of the bill. When you put everything together that is contained in that, we have major concerns about creating opportunities for ballot harvesting, which has been problematic in some other states in the past. And the provisions in there, we believe, also make it more difficult to maintain an accurate checklist of voters that are eligible to vote, making it too easy to get unqualified voters on the checklist. And this bill makes it more difficult to remove voters that are unqualified if it's determined that there's a problem there. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will stop and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Deputy Scanlon. Representative Cody, you've had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Deputy, do you agree that the passage of this amendment would require separating the federal and state elections for ballot purposes?
That would be one option.
And further question?
Sure, go ahead.
What would the other options be?
That we have different ballots and different checklists on the day of the election.
Can I have a further question, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, one more.
Thank you. One more. Well, in that case, that being the case, do you have any idea what the financial impact of the passage of this amendment would be for your office?
No, not at the moment. In fact, we don't know what the financial impact of the passage of S1 is going to be either. And that will be.
That would have been my next question. Thank you.
Okay, also with their hand up, Representative Muirhead, I think you were second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Deputy. I understand, that much of your testimony focused on legislation in the United States legislature. And I wonder is your understanding that this amendment converts the New Hampshire Senate Bill 89 into a referendum on the Senate Bill 1 in the national legislature?
I think this amendment fires a shot across the bow to Congress about the wisdom of passing such legislation that would be a federal takeover of our election. Let me just elaborate on that a little more, because if S1 passes, Congress now controls the election laws for the state of New Hampshire. All of these items that we've been debating over the years at a local level, determining whether it makes sense or not for our voters, would now be determined by Congress. And when you look at the makeup of Congress, there's over 400 members in the House of Representatives. New Hampshire has 2 of them. So who's really going to be writing the election laws if this federal takeover takes place? It's going to be states like California, New York, Texas, all of those states that have large numbers of members of Congress. New Hampshire is going to struggle in that environment. And I don't think that's healthy or fair to the citizens of our state.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So my understanding from that answer is that yes, this amendment converts this bill into a referendum, i.e. a shot across the bow with respect to national legislation. Is there concern in the Secretary of State's office in the state of New Hampshire that the office's stand on national legislation will compromise the nonpartisan standing and integrity of the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office?
the climate, in politics now is that there's a great deal of polarization. And it is difficult for an office like Secretary of State, no matter what we're talking about, to administer the elections and take positions on bad pieces of legislation when we see it and not be accused of being partisan one way or the other. But if we don't speak up, we're not doing our job. We're not alerting our citizens to what is going on. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, and I've repeated this, that position for years when I've given testimony, is that there is a delicate balance that we have to find between making voting easy and making sure that it's secure enough that people have confidence that their votes are being counted and not being diluted or other fraudulent activity taking place. And that is the perspective that we are approaching this issue from. It is not a partisan position. It is one of administration.
Thank you. Representative Home O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Scanlon, for joining us. My question is about the reaction of this legislation from local town clerks, supervisors of the checklist, and town moderators who run our elections in New Hampshire. And when I think of any bill, I think of them first, and I think of how feasible and reasonable anything is to implement here on the ground in real life in New Hampshire. And I recently read an article where they questioned 24 town clerks, and 21 of them opposed the For the People Act. And they would have approved of this amendment then. And I would like to know what you think when you had a recent meeting with local town clerks throughout the state. And those clerks, you talked about the polarization and partisanship of this. Those clerks and those officials, they come from all political spectrums. They're on the left, they're on the right, they're Republicans, they're Democrats, they're independents, they're everywhere. How is the reaction from those people on the ground running elections in New Hampshire on this bill, on the For the People Act and on this amendment?
Thank you for that question. We work very closely with local election officials generally, but very closely with the clerks. We discuss legislation that is taking place with them, and we did give a briefing on HR 1 a couple of weeks ago, just to inform them of the contents of that bill so that they had an understanding of what was being proposed. We did not, after that event take place, poll the clerks in any way. I would think that they share the same concerns that we have because we are in the business of administrating elections together. But I have not taken a poll. I have not heard from the executive committee of the clerks on whether they've taken a position or not. But as legislators, you may want to reach out to your local election officials and ask them, if they attended that briefing and what their opinion is of this federal legislation.
Thank you. Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Scanlon, first, the PowerPoint that you referred to, I have not seen it, nor was I aware of it. So if it could be shared with all members of the committee, I would appreciate it. You also asked in your testimony, when you read out the things on page 20 of the bill, if anyone would just say that voting, any of those problems existed in New Hampshire. Even the legislation on SB 3, where it requires multiple PhD degrees to understand the affidavit, I would say we have at least one of those problems that you read out. Would you agree with that?
I think I would disagree with you on that point. And to answer the first part of your question, I'll be happy to make sure that the committee gets a copy of the PowerPoint.
Okay. And a follow-up, one more question, please, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. If I heard you correctly, Deputy Scanlon, I think you referenced in your testimony, you talked about keeping our vote pure. Language is important, and perhaps because I grew up in the Deep South, that smacks of Jim Crow
I'm
talk.
sorry, Representative Lay, I don't mean to interrupt you, but your screen froze up on me for like 4
Oh,
seconds.
sorry. If I heard you correctly, you used the term keeping our vote pure. And I just wanted to say that as someone who grew up in the Deep South, smacks of Jim Crow talk, and I think we need to be careful. As you indicated, this is a highly charged issue. And I just wanted to make you aware that that may touch off that type of language. It certainly had a knee-jerk reaction for me. I don't know if that's true for everyone on the committee, but I think we need to be
Representative
careful.
Lane, I don't recall using words keeping a vote pure. If I did, it was, I just don't recall saying that exactly that way.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I misheard. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lane. Representative Bergeron, you've been very patient. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Deputy Scanlon, in looking at the proposed amendment, could you tell me what provisions in this amendment would give you or any other election official the authority to conduct parallel elections for federal offices and that for state and county offices, including adapting, changing, or making any other types of edits to voter registration, setting up the polling place, checklist procedures, counting the ballots, and so on?
I can't point to anything in the amendment. However, if S1 were to pass, we would be doing a major rewrite of all of our election laws.
Further question, Mr. Vice Chair?
Go ahead.
So then, if Senate Bill 1 does pass, and that we both agree is pure speculation, major legislation is going to have to be introduced anyway to make sure that New Hampshire's laws conform with or can work with the federal law. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Barry.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Scanlon. Can you hear me all right? I'm a little far away from the microphone.
If you could just speak up, you're slightly muted.
I've never been accused of that, not talking loud enough before, so I'll take that as a compliment. Has any member of our federal delegation spoken with you or your office directly about S1 or HR1?
Not that I'm aware of.
Why do you think that is? This is, as you say, a major takeover of our elections. Why do you think our federal delegation, all 4 members, Congressman Pappas, Senator Hassan, Senator Shaheen, and Congressman Lincoln Custer, could not be bothered to reach out to the office that runs our elections in New Hampshire?
I don't know the answer to that question, Representative.
I think I do. I think it's because they don't care.
Any other questions for Deputy Scanlon? Seeing none, Representative Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Scanlon, for taking my question. Do you see this, how do you see this in light of the federal constitution and the state constitution? How do you see S1 as relating to the constitutional requirements for elections?
Well, S1 is in conflict with provisions of New Hampshire's constitution. You know, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, any other questions for Deputy Scanlon? I think we're done, Deputy Scanlon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, we have Representative Timothy Horrigan signed up here. Would like to testify. Representative Horrigan, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
He's on his way.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, I'm all set. Thank you. I'm Representative Timothy Horrigan. I represent Bradford County District 6, which is the towns of Durham and Madbury. Durham is not, is probably worth mentioning. Durham is a college town, and so one of the many aspects of voting law that's always a controversy is the whole issue of residency, because we have a large number of residents who are students. Actually, one of the things with the student voting, I won't go too much in that, is that we always assume that if you lived out of state before you came and lived in New Hampshire to attend college, that you can vote absentee in your old state, and that's not necessarily the case, depending on what the law in the other state is. And certainly it's good to have a certain amount of uniformity in election law just for that reason and many others. This bill is, first of all, it has like 11 lines of text, and I think we would have a hard time figuring out what exactly it means. You know, Representative Griffin did give an explanation of what her intent was, but I'm not sure if that's what that 11 lines of text actually says. Certainly, it's massively premature insofar as S1 and HR1 have not passed yet. We don't know exactly what form they're going to take. So like we probably certainly Reverend Scanlon, I probably disagree with his opinion about this particular amendment, but he studied in great detail. Certainly you should consult with him. You could probably have a subcommittee where he could speak for more than 3 minutes plus the question time. And certainly this summer, this fall, whenever the bill passed, we'll have to examine it and see what changes we need to make to our existing laws. But I think this is way too soon to pass something like that. And certainly having 2 different elections systems for federal and state offices, that's my opinion, it sounds like a totally absurd idea, especially given that we rely a lot on federal funding for our state elections. And just in the past, the federal government has felt, and rightly so, that local elections are not entirely beyond its purview. So we spend a lot of federal money. In fact, we're putting the budget together. We spend as much federal money as possible. We make lots of decisions that affect federal things. But also
30 seconds, Representative.
Okay, I also just like to defend the congressional delegation, all of whom are friends of mine, of saying they don't care. I don't know whether or not they've called Secretary Gardner or Deputy Secretary Scanlon. I'm sure if they picked up the phone and called any of the senators or congressperson's office, they would probably be happy to talk to them. And I'm sure sounds like they have talked to them. So that's just sort of an unfair characterization. It's certainly one of the things we do at the state level is redistricting, and that affects.
Thank you, Representative Horrigan. Your time is up. Any questions? Representative Horrigan. Thank you, Representative Horrigan, for your testimony.
Oh, thank you. So anyway, don't pass the amendment. The bill's great, but this amendment just doesn't add anything to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Also signed up to speak is Marjorie Phillips.
I do not see Marjorie. If she would raise her hand, that would be helpful, but she does not appear to be on the list.
I don't see her either. Okay. Thank you. Also signed up to speak, and I apologize, I'll probably mispronounce this name, Kelsey Klementowicz.
And here she is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My name is Kelsey Klementowicz. I live in Portsmouth, and I'm a civil rights lawyer focusing on voting issues. I'm testifying today as a member of the public, but informed by my experience working with local elections officials and hearing from thousands of New Hampshire voters. HB 89 is a thoughtful and necessary bill to assist our hardworking New Hampshire elections officials and voters, but this amendment would do the opposite. The Supremacy Clause of the US Constitution establishes that the federal Constitution and federal law generally take precedence over state laws and even state constitutions. And so because New Hampshire law cannot preempt federal law for federal offices elections, this amendment will only create 2 separate schemes and separate procedures for federal offices and local offices, even on one election day. So this would more than double the work of local elections officials during federal election cycles. You can imagine federal officials must offer voters one set of ballots, forms, and rules for federal offices and a separate set for local offices. They must also somehow manage and maintain 2 different voter registration and absentee ballot lists, all for one election. You can imagine how confusing this would be for voters, how it would slow down lines on election days and inundate clerk's offices. So let's assume for a moment that HR 1 passes and includes online voter registration, and the SOS implements a comprehensive voter portal system like they have in other states, where a voter can register, change their address, or request an absentee ballot online. But say a voter registers online and requests their absentee ballot, then they can only get a ballot for federal offices under this amendment. So then they're calling their clerk, realizing they have to do additional forms, trying to get a ballot. But then that voter also needs to go on election day to vote for local offices. Then are they just given a ballot for local offices, which would necessitate probably a separate machine in order to process that? Or are moderators required to cancel their absentee ballots, which means they can't be fed into the machines until after the close of polls? So these practical reasons are some of the reasons why attempts to create a 2-tier election system have failed or been struck down across the United States. No state currently has this kind of a 2-tiered system. But the Texas legislature actually just heard a similar bill just last week. That was HB 4507, which would force voters to register separately for federal and state elections, also in response to HR 1. But this bill failed, even in the Republican-controlled House, because of those costs and administrative challenges. Also, Kansas and Arizona had bifurcated schemes, both of which, well, the first of which was struck down by the courts, and Arizona did a settlement to unify their system in lieu of the court judgment. So this amended bill, if passed, would probably be unlikely to survive a legal challenge and would tie the state up in costly and unnecessary litigation. Finally, this bill attempts to address a problem that just doesn't exist.
Thank you for your testimony.
The details of HR 1 are still being worked.
Ma'am, please.
Oh, I apologize.
Walker, your 3 minutes. Any questions? Are you taking questions, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Okay, any questions for this witness? Okay, I have no questions for you. Actually, Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you mind submitting, have you submitted your testimony in writing?
No, but I'm happy to.
Would you please do so? Thank you.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would remind the witness that since we're going to be voting on this bill today, the same day as the hearing, and slightly more than 24 hours since the amendment was sent out, that she better hurry if her testimony isn't already reduced to writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cody. Okay, again,
Just as a point of clarification, Mr. Chairman, this amendment's been out for over a week. It's been publicly available for a week.
again, Ms. Clemente,
That's interesting. I haven't seen it.
It's available on the General Court's website, Representative Cody.
okay, Representative Lane, did you have something further? No, okay. All right, thank you very much. And then, yes, please submit that. Okay, also signed up to testify is Phil Hatcher.
I'm bringing him over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McDonald and the other members of the Election Law Committee. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, my name is Phil Hatcher. I'm a resident of Dover. I'm testifying to put the debate that HR 1 has provoked into a historical context. In 1903, New Hampshire amended its constitution to require that voters be able to, quote, read the English language and to write, unquote. In 1905, a law was passed to put in place a literacy test to be applied when a person went to register to vote. Slips of paper were placed in a box with each slip containing 5 lines of the state constitution. A person applying to vote would reach into the box to select a slip and then needed to read all 5 lines, copy by hand one of the lines, and then sign their name. I'm not sure what the motivation was for the literacy test. Perhaps there was a concern about the growth of the number of non-English speaking immigrants at the time. But it seems clear that the law was intended to suppress the votes that were perceived as low quality. The literacy test stayed on the books, believe it or not, until 1976. What was the motivation to finally remove it? Well, it was the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act, which aimed to eliminate the voting apartheid that existed in many southern states at the time. Southerners and many state rights advocates were upset about what they saw as federal overreach. However, both senators from New Hampshire voted for the bill, one Republican and one Democrat. New Hampshire got caught in the war for full citizenship of for African Americans because of the literacy test. The combination of having the literacy test still on the books and 10 towns had poor voter participation in the 1968 election caused those 10 towns to be to be labeled as covered jurisdictions, requiring any changes to their voting procedures to be pre-cleared by the federal. This caused, so I do not know why New Hampshire decided to leave its literacy tests on the books, even after the passing of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. But I hope that we would all agree today that finally removing the literacy test was a good thing, and that the Civil Rights Act was a very good thing for our nation. More recently, in 1993, the federal government passed the National Voter Registration Act, better known as the Motor Voter Bill. This bill is what encouraged us to go to election day registration. As Chair Griffin mentioned, in recent years, we've had high voter participation.
You have 30 seconds left, sir.
As measured by the Secretary of State, and I believe that's in fact because of this federal legislation that encouraged us to improve our voting procedures. So while the details of HR 1 surely should be debated, a blanket refusal to allow the federal government to call for improvements to our state voting practices has no historical basis. Thank you for listening to this testimony, and please vote against this non-germane amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatcher. Any questions for Mr. Hatcher? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir, for joining us this morning. Next signed up to testify is Chris Ager. Mr. Ager, are you with us?
I'm sorry, who did you call for?
Chris Ager. I don't see him. Do you, Pam?
I'm still not hearing the name.
Christopher Ager, A-G-E-R is the last name.
Oh, okay.
He's at the essay contest.
Okay.
I do not see him.
Thank you. Also signed up to speak is Ken Barnes. Mr. Barnes, are you with us?
I have promoted him because he was next on my list.
Yes, I am. My name is Ken Barnes. I live in Kentucky, New Hampshire. Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. Thank you for hearing my testimony. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Ken Barnes. I live in Kentucky, New Hampshire. And I speak against this amendment as non-germane. It is what is known to all of you, no doubt, and politicians as a poison pill. It is something that is not actually related to the bill that it's attached to, and it has the completely opposite effect as the bill itself. SB 89 would help to make voting easier, more uniform, more fair in New Hampshire, and this amendment would do the opposite. It would make voting more difficult and more costly. The bill would, by creating two separate voting systems, as Deputy Scanlon said, the solution to different, might not have to be different days. It could be on different ballots and with different checklists and with different procedures. So everything would be done double by the local election officials. Voters would have to follow two different processes for registering and voting, depending on whether the state of New Hampshire's rules for their ballots were different from the federal government's rules for its ballots. And that would cost money. And New Hampshire doesn't have the money. But the most important thing is that it would reduce the number of people who voted. Secretary of State's office, the governor, all of us have praised the New Hampshire voting system in the last election and previous elections as being open, fair, encouraging people to vote, and making it easier for people to vote during the pandemic. And I suggest
similarly not during the pandemic. It should be easier for more people to vote, and that's what democracy is all about. And this would just create massive confusion, extra work for the local election officials, and
30 seconds.
extra costs, thank you, I'm almost done, extra costs to the local property taxpayers who, God knows, are already overburdened with paying costs. So I ask you to please vote no on the amendment. Thank you very much for your time. And I'll take questions if anybody has them.
Any questions for Mr. Barnes? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Barnes, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Our next signed up to speak is Cordell Johnston. Johnston.
He is on the way.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cordell Johnston, representing New Hampshire Municipal Association.
You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. And I'm not exactly sure what to say about this amendment. My initial reaction when I read it was that it's crazy. It can't work to have basically two separate processes for elections for reasons that other people have talked about. But I have to admit that I had not paid as much attention to HR1 as I should. I spend pretty much all my time following state legislation, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for what's going on at the federal level. I had assumed, and I think correctly, that the debate on HR1 was characterized by extreme partisan hyperbole on both sides. And so I decided that I should actually get a little more familiar with it. And I have read it, not in any detail, but have gone through it. And I realize this isn't a hearing on HR1, but there are, in my opinion, a lot of good things in HR1, but there are also some things that would be impossible in New Hampshire. And the one thing I'll mention specifically is the early voting provisions. The idea that and under this bill, every voting location in New Hampshire would have to be open 10 hours a day for 15 days before the election is simply insane. I'm the moderator in my town. I do not have 10 hours a day for 15 days in a row to spend sitting at the polling place waiting for 1 or 2 people to come in and vote. Now, something like that may make sense in a place like Georgia or Texas, where you might have 500,000 people voting in one location. But in a town where you have, 70, as I said, it's insane. And there's no, you don't have an option. There's no possibility for waiver. So I still don't think, I'm not at all convinced this amendment is, okay, I'm not at all convinced this amendment is the answer. I think we are in an impossible situation. And my suggestion is that committee members try to work with our congressional delegation to fix the problems in HR1. Whether that's possible, I severely doubt, but I think that's what I would try to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Anyone have questions? Yes, Representative Barry.
Mr. Johnston, you're here representing the New Hampshire Municipal Association, correct?
That's right.
Has any member of our federal delegation reached out to you to discuss the implementation of S1 or HR1, given that your members would be the one effectively implementing it?
Not to my knowledge. I think that we probably will be contacting them in the near future.
Thank you.
To express our concerns.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Johnston.
Thank you.
Next side up to speak is Lucas Meyer. Mr. Meyer, are you with us?
He is, and he's on the way.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is
Lucas Meyer. I am the volunteer chair of 603 Forward, an organization that works with working age adults in New Hampshire. And one of our core pillars is making sure our state has a healthy democracy as we move forward. We obviously have great concerns about this amendment. One, especially considering the fact it's been attached to SB 89, which is the result of great bipartisan work in the Senate. So to attach this rather partisan bill to it in order to either sink it or change its purpose, I think is rather insidious. And then to the nature of trying to establish two separate forms of election in response to HR 1, which would transform and strengthen our democracy, is concerning. I would also like to highlight, following Mr. Johnson's testimony from the Municipal Association, there are write-ups happening to the bill as we speak, including an exemption for communities under 3,000 people, would not have that early vote provision. Timelines have been extended for implementation. There is clearly work being done on this bill to make it work for states like New Hampshire, and it can work for New Hampshire. And I think this amendment, I think this hearing does a disservice to voters of New Hampshire, a disservice to our local election officials. And I think given the rhetoric put forth this morning, I think the intent is very clear why this amendment was introduced. And I do not think it is in the best interest of our voters, of our elections, and of our democracy. So I would encourage this committee to really consider if they want to pass this, especially not understanding what the impact would be to our local election officials, to our voters, how much this would cost. It is clear there are not enough answers to this amendment, even remotely close, to move forward with it. Our democracy is in urgent need of repair. I think everybody on this call, I think everybody in our state would agree that government doesn't always work for the people. The only power grab I see right now is in the of billionaires, of corporate special interests in our elections, and HR 1, S1, the For the People Act will fix that. So I encourage this committee, I implore this committee to vote this amendment down and pass SB 89 as is. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Meyer? Seeing none, okay, moving on. Next sign up to testify is Michael Thornton.
I do not see Mr. Thornton in the attendee list. If he is there, could he raise his hand? And if he is the phone, it would be *9.
Okay.
He's not there.
Okay, next sign up to testify is Alvin C. Mr. C, are you with us?
Mr. C is here.
Damn, yes. Morning, Mr. C, you have 3 minutes. Need to unmute, sir. Need to unmute. You're still muted.
There it goes.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am in support of SB 89 and the amendment number 1445. I don't like the idea of the U.S. Congress apparently violating the U.S. Constitution and having a federal takeover of the election process. I would support this amendment, even if it meant we have to have separate federal and state ballots, with potentially some voters not qualifying to get both ballots. And I would also support this amendment if it required New Hampshire to have 2 separate election days for the 2 different ballots. I think it would also be appropriate for the New Hampshire legislature to create a resolution to send the message to Senators Hassan and Shaheen to urge them to protect New Hampshire elections and to vote against US Bills HR 1 and S1. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. C? See none, sir. Thank you for joining us. Also signed up to speak this morning is Liz Tentarelli. Ms. Tentarelli, are you with us?
She is and on the way.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Tentarelli. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Liz Tentarelli. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire. And our mission is to empower voters. Earlier this morning, Deputy Scanlon said election process has to work for all voters. And I fear this amendment, if HR 1 passes and if this amendment passes, will do exactly the opposite. Rather than empower voters, it will frustrate voters. It will discourage voters. It will make voters lose confidence in a system. We have great voter turnout in New Hampshire, as we're all well aware. And we have confidence in our elections. The governor, the secretary of state, and election officials have all reported that. But if in the future, voters have to register one way for federal elections and register a different way for state, county, and local elections, they will lose that confidence that the system knows what it's doing. That's not what we want to have happen. We want voters to participate in our democracy. Now, whether or not you like HR 1 is up to each individual. And I think it's up to the members of this committee to make their views known to our congressional delegation, but to try to legislate their viewpoint seems like a reach of power, just as we are criticizing the federal government possibly for an overreach here. I think trying to legislate this way is also an overreach. I support SB 89. It's a good bill with bipartisan support. I oppose this amendment because of the effects it will have on the public, the voting public, and it will discourage them from voting. When things get too complicated, people will not vote. New Hampshire has good election laws. We have, for instance, a voter ID law that has alternatives for those who come without a driver's license. That's good. Thank you. But we have some of those very good things that are in HR 1. I will leave the argument over HR 1 up to you, but to legislate it here is not the way to go. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Tentarelli? Seeing none, moving on. Next signed up to testify is Deborah Nelson. Ms. Nelson, are you with us?
I beg your pardon. It went.
You are. Thank you.
My name is Deborah Nelson, and I thank you for allowing me this time. I live in Hanover, where I have volunteered at the polls on election day for the last 30 years. Until I recently retired, I taught American history and literature for 3 decades in New Hampshire's public schools. One important goal was to educate my students about what it means that the United States is a democracy, and to celebrate the points in history when additional groups were enfranchised. I taught my students to take the act of voting seriously and encouraged them to volunteer so they would understand the importance of political engagement. In addition, as a child growing up during the Cold War, I lived in Baghdad, as well as in East and West Africa, where my father worked to support democratic principles and to encourage governments to follow the model of the United States rather than that of the then Soviet Union. It is therefore with no small degree of dismay that I respond to this amendment, which distorts information contained in the federal bill. There's no other way of looking at it. And it does everything possible to create barriers to voting when in a true democracy, the right of people to exercise their vote should be of greatest importance. The For the People Act is not a, quote, federal takeover, and I really wish we could stop using such charged language to discuss bills that come before us. This amendment raises the potential for incredible confusion on the part of voters, as you've heard. It expands the burden on town clerks, presents poll workers and supervisors of the checklist with redundant tasks, and raises the cost for towns to hold elections. And I would argue that the Secretary of State's presentation to town clerks a few weeks ago was distorted, was riddled with misinformation, and was highly not independent. In other words, it was very partisan. There are many questions that have already been raised by other groups about 2 checklists, 2 voting days. I won't repeat all of them. But the For the People Act bill, which is before the federal government, which this amendment seeks to undermine, contrary to what you've heard from several people, provides all necessary funding. It is not going to ask the state to do something and not.
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. It eases registration. It gets rid of the role dark money plays in our politics. It has bipartisan support from the American public, and it celebrates the democratic act of voting. This amendment does none of that, and I cannot imagine, nor have I heard yet this morning, any persuasive argument for its passage. I support the bill, the voting bill before you, but not this amendment, which also has no fiscal note attached to it.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for your testimony.
That way. Thank you very much.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes,
I see no questions for you, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
thank you.
Also signed up to speak is Elizabeth Farrell. Ms. Farrell, are you with us?
She is.
I see her, yes, okay. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name's Elizabeth Carell, and I live in Concord. I oppose this amendment as a ward supervisor of the checklist. So my comments are specifically in the realm of the local impact, and I really have 2 points to share. You know, as a supervisor, we come to our jobs as volunteers, and we're usually picking up the procedure manual that the Secretary of State prepares 1, 2, maybe 3 times a year, depending on the number of elections occurring. This is not something we do every day, so we're reviewing that procedure manual. It's a tough job in that that procedure manual is now 380 pages long. So the notion that we are now going to have 2 checklists, 2 processes to follow, I find mind-boggling and quite frustrating. The other factor that's occurring at many polling places is it's getting harder to find people to run for supervisor, moderator, and some of these tasks. So be aware that we do this because we care, but the harder you make it, the harder it will be to find people like us to carry out this job. My second point is, you've heard it many times, confusion is used as a tool to keep people away from the polls. There has been confusion built into the process over the last 10 years with every change that comes to the ballot process. Someone asked earlier, do you know anyone who hasn't come? Well, think about that question. Somebody who's been denied voting. If they haven't come to the door, how would I know that? You know, it's the confusion that causes them to pause and say, well, I guess maybe I can't vote. So I hope it's clear that I oppose this amendment. I highly support efforts to enable people to vote honestly and through a trustworthy process. I do not believe this amendment has that goal in mind. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. My questions for Ms. Farrell. I see none. Thank you very much for your testimony. Also signed up to speak is Kevin Fleming. Mr. Fleming, are you with us?
I do not see Mr. Fleming on the attendee list. Again, if he's the phone number, he could raise his hand with *9.
Not seeing him either.
He does not appear to be here.
Also signed up to speak is Jody Nelson. Ms. Nelson, are you with us?
She is.
From Derry.
Oops. There she is.
Good morning, Ms. Nelson. You're muted. You have 3 minutes. You need to unmute. Still muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. I was having technical difficulties at home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for your time. My name is Jody Nelson from Derry. Out of respect for people's time, I will just state I am testifying in support of this amendment for all the reasons in favor that have been noted prior to my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Are you taking questions or?
I'm not taking questions, no.
No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also signed up to speak this morning is Michael Saber. Mr. Saber, are you with us?
I do not see Mr. Saba.
Okay, and then the last person who has signed up to speak for this morning, Chow Kelly. Ms. Kelly, are you with us?
I do not see her either. But we do have some additional hands that have been raised. Amanda Goki, Olivia Zink, and Susan Richmond.
Sure. Okay. Yes, and you promoted Ms. Goki. Goki, are you with us?
Oh, it looks like her hand is now down.
Okay. Ms. Zink, would you like to testify?
Here she is.
Good morning, Ms. Zink.
Good morning,
You have 3 minutes.
Chair and members of the committee. I am testifying in opposition of this amendment. For the record, my name is Olivia Zink from Franklin, and I'm the Executive Director of Open Democracy Action, a nonpartisan, nonprofit, pro-voter organization. HR 1, the For the People Act, passed the U.S. House in March, and on May 11th, the Senate Rules Committee did mark up on S1. This and the proposed amendments are the largest democracy reform bill in 50 years. This bill is a critical package of reform that is supported by the overwhelming majority of Americans across party lines to get dark money out of politics, crack down on corruption, protect voting rights, and ensure safe, accessible, and accurate elections. According to a poll, 83% of Americans support this. And then the campaign finance provisions, 96% of Democrats, 74% of Republicans, and 73% of independents favor the For the People. Voters nearly unanimously support provisions to limit influence of big money in politics. 94% of voters support making political transparency, political contributions to be fully disclosed. Also providing more transparency of lobbying and lobbying activity. So these are really broad support across the aisle. The For the People Act does make a promise to our democracy and really making sure we have equitable rights. These are national standards that set a floor. They're common sense standards like automatic voter registration, online voter registration, same-day voter registration. It has been brought up earlier that this impacts photo ID requirements. I urge you to read the bill and not listen to the dark money advertisements in New Hampshire. This bill just says if you don't have a photo ID, you have to sign an affidavit, which is what New Hampshire does. We take their picture, people sign an affidavit. So please read the bill, and not listen to the dark money advertisements. This bill also ends partisan gerrymandering by creating an independent redistricting commission. I think we all can agree that voters should be picking our representatives and not our politicians picking.
You have 30 seconds.
Getting big money out of politics and combating corruption. It's very important that we do this. This amendment, simply put, creates massive confusion and costs New Hampshire a lot of money. Federal law cannot be nullified. The federal government will run federal elections, and creating a two-track system is inappropriate. Therefore, I urge you to vote down this amendment. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Zink. Any questions from Ms. Zink? Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony. Also signed up to speak this morning, Susan Richmond. Raise your hand up. You have 3 minutes. Please unmute.
Yes, hello, thank you for taking my testimony. I am speaking in opposition to the non-germane amendment 1445 to House Bill 89. I worry there's been no financial note for what exactly it may cost to run two parallel election systems. Who would then be responsible for picking up the increased cost? And is this something else that will be passed down to towns and cities to pay? Additionally, I have personal experience working in my town's elections, a poll worker, of how very great the time commitment is for our election officials before election day, during the very long day at the polls, and then many steps to process records afterwards. Where will an extra workforce be found to run two sets of elections? And in the case of paid workers, how will that be paid for? Additionally, it takes about 100 volunteers to fully staff our polls. Is it likely that 100 volunteers will be found if there is going to be a second day of parallel elections? If not, then, as was mentioned before, there's the expense of a second set of voting machines. So either way, the resources, either human or financial, will be considerable. And there are so many of these details that need to be considered before a bill of this size is allowed to move forward. As it stands now, this bill's purpose seems to create an election process that is chaotic, which will then, of course, discourage people from voting at all. So thank you for listening to me, and I urge you please to not to pass this non-germane amendment 1445 to House Bill 89. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Richmond? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also signed up to speak is Terry Lakeland. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. You're with us, please unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Kiri Claflin, and I'm a supervisor of the checklist in Concord Ward 5. I've submitted written testimony several days ago to this committee, so I'm not going to rehearse so much of what's been said that I do agree with. I'm speaking in opposition to this amendment for many of the reasons that have been talked about. I just want to add a couple of extra things. I really object to the characterization of election official attitudes toward S1. These comments this morning and earlier in the media have been, they're speculative. There's been no reliable polling done. And to take the opinions of only 24 town clerks who were, I don't know how they were chosen. Were they called, were they chosen by the Secretary of State to get their opinion? I don't know that, but I know that I fully support S1. And while it's not a perfect bill, I agree with others who have said, I think it's incumbent upon the elected officials in this state, to you guys and the Secretary of State, to reach out to our senators, because what's going on right now is a markup. And if you have concerns, if you have special needs that you want to make sure that you get on the record I urge you to please contact them and get involved in that process, as opposed to on the back end, obstructing, resisting, and putting out misinformation about this bill. So just in closing, I'll stress that this amendment ignores the fact that not only do election officials want and support many of these modernizations in S1, but it is very popular with voters of all political ideologies. In my written testimony, I have a couple of footnotes that tell you where I've gotten my information about polling. I just, some of that's been mentioned, but the polling data show that implementing national standards for elections is far more popular with Republican, Democratic, and Independent voters than so-called states' right. Thank you. So please do not needlessly complicate our elections, just despite the federal government or prove a point. It is the voters and the election officials of New Hampshire who will surely suffer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions from Ms. Claflin? I see none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And, we also have Linda Bundy who wants to speak. Ms. Bundy, are you with us? Or you will be?
I've just promoted her, and also Janet Ward has contacted me and would like to speak.
Okay, great. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Bundy.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Linda Bundy. I'm from Antrim. I'm speaking in opposition to the non-germane amendment to SB 89. If this passes, we will have two standards for elections. Federal elections will be conducted one way. The New Hampshire Constitution and New Hampshire law will apply to non-federal elections. Two ballots, two procedures, and requirements relating to voter eligibility, voter registration, absentee voting, conducting the vote, and counting of votes. This will be confusing for voters and serve as a barrier to voting for many people. It will create additional work for election officials. Establishing two separate systems will incur significant expenses. The For the People Act will move election procedures forward into the 21st century and allow even more participation by New Hampshire voters. I am confident that our Secretary of State would still maintain secure elections even as they become more accessible. I support SB 89, but I urge the committee members to vote against this amendment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bundy. Any questions for Ms. Bundy? See none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And Janet Ward, you also wish to speak?
Yes, she's been promoted, and if she would unmute herself, that would be great. Janet Ward.
Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Morning. Good morning. Just one moment. Good morning to you. I recently watched the presentation offered by Deputy Secretary of State David Scanlon to the New Hampshire election officials on the For the People Act. During this conversation, I suggested to Mr. Scanlon that he contact our federal delegation with his concerns regarding S1. I also told Mr. Scanlon that not his slideshow, but his commentary on the act was as disingenuous and willfully blind to the critical objectives of the For the People Act as is this non-germane amendment to a good bill, SB 89, which you are considering today. I also watched the entirety of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary's hearing on the For the People Act, during which New Hampshire's Secretary of State also demonstrated what had to be willful blindness regarding the critical necessity of this legislation. Surely he and Mr. Scanlon have witnessed the multitude of voter suppression laws being considered nationwide and must appreciate the need for the For the People Act. Let us be clear, the For the People Act was not designed to disrespect states like New Hampshire, which did an admirable job of conducting safe and fair elections, even during the pandemic. As for the letter sent to Senator Maggie Hassan by Representatives Ross Berry and Joe Sweeney, like the testimony of Mr. Gardner and the presentation by Mr. Scanlon, it contains a deliberate failure to acknowledge and document critical voter suppression issues the act was designed to address, as well as considerable misinformation. Here are some of the key objectives of the legislation. To ensure that billionaires and corporate special interests cannot buy our elections, to directly address corrupt practices which deny legitimate voters their right to vote, to end the corrupt practice of gerrymandering. The members of this committee are charged with protecting the keystone of our democracy, our right to vote. There is no defensible reason to support this non-germane amendment, which would require totally unnecessary, financially costly, and utterly confusing separate sets of elections for states. In general, thank you, elections. This amendment would block provisions that would protect and enhance the rights of legitimate voters, such as automatic voter registration, online voter registration, and no excuse absentee voting, which not only safeguarded the health of voters, but increased voter participation in November. Please support 89 and vote no on this amendment, and realize that you can reach out to your federal delegation and explain your concerns. And as the bill is being marked up.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Your time is up. Any questions, Ms. Ward?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're all set. Thank you, ma'am. I see no one else asking to testify. Pam, are you aware? Oh, yes, I see one other. Bob Perry, Mr. Perry.
Yes, I've just promoted him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. First off, I'd like to have my written testimony, which I submitted last night, reflecting that I'm speaking on SB 89, HB 89. I speak in support of 89, but I speak in opposition to Amendment 1445H. S1 is a federal bill that sets minimum standards for conducting of elections. This bill is vehemently opposed by big money interests, even as 47 states advance 350 restrictive voting rights bills that ignore the successful voter turnout in the November election. Among the many big money TV and social media ads opposing S1 that I have encountered, I conclude they all take full advantage of the doctrine of lying as protected speech. The effect of this amendment is to reject the minimum standards for voting in America's elections generally, and specifically ensuring that manipulation of political districts to benefit the majority party remains a viable option. It pits states' rights against voting rights. We are a not so united United States of America. The sham so-called audit by the cyber ninja partisan amateurs currently taking place in Arizona directly affects election results in the other 49 states in presidential elections and demonstrates the absolute need for federal minimum standards for elections, ensuring that ordinary voters have a fighting chance against moneyed interests hell-bent on overturning an election. Thankfully, the Arizona Board of Supervisors several days ago released a symbolic cease and desist order to followers of the big lie. It reads in part, "It's time to end this for the good of the Senate, for the good of the country, and for the good of the democratic institutions that define us as Americans." I join in their protestations. I join with the majority of Americans who support S1. I oppose the efforts of moneyed interests that do not value the successful and historic voter turnout in November 2020, made possible through the expansion of opportunities to participate in the franchise. I respectfully but strongly urge this amendment be defeated. Thank you, and I'll take no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perry, for joining us. If there's no one else asking to testify, Pam, are you aware of anyone else?
I am not. I do see Representative Lane has her hand up, but that's the only hand I see.
Go ahead. Representative Lane?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if you had stated, or if you would state, what the sign-in tallies were on this amendment.
The sign-in tallies, 307 in support, 331 in opposition, neutral 1. In total to testify were 20 initially.
Thank you.
All right, with no one else asking to testify, I'm going to declare this hearing closed. Thank you, everyone, for your indulgence, and I would invite Chairman Griffin back to the chair.
Why don't we take a break till 11:30? Sorry, Representative Davis. Let's take care of business. So we'll take a break. First.
All right, Madam Chair, we are unmuted and our video is on.
It is 11:30. Thank you to the Election Law Committee for the attentiveness this morning at the public hearing. We are back after recess. As noticed in the House calendar, we have Senate bills that remain before us to be acted on. And we're going to go through those Senate bills in order. And the first bill we have is SB 31, relative to voter checklists and modifying the absentee ballot affidavit. This bill was modifying supervisors of the checklist actions and dealt with providing voter information from the Secretary of State and the cities and towns. The committee has received, so members of the public are aware, a number of proposed amendments. And I am open to any amendments which have not yet been distributed. If anybody has them, I am not aware of any. Representative Lane, I see you have your hand open. Is your hand up?
It's open too.
Okay.
I just was wondering, since this is a separate hearing, do we have to go through, we're present, we're by ourselves, all that? Do we need to go through those protocols? I just don't want all this work to go for naught and have somebody come back later and say we didn't do it.
I'm hoping Pam is back in her office. I don't think so. Pam, do we need to do another roll call for attendance and do the whole opening again?
We have, when we've changed the type of meeting. I don't know a hard and fast, requirement for it. But the other committees I've worked with have, just to be on the safe side, they have repeated the roll call and the opening announcement.
Opening announcement. All right.
But not all the discussion of the mics and everything, but
All right. Well, thank you, Representative Lane, for that question, and thank you to Pam Smarling for clarifying that other committees have done that. In light of the fact that we are now in a different mode, we are going from public hearing to executive session. I will say that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the Governor's Emergency Order 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this body is authorized to meet electronically in regards to the matters scheduled in the House calendar for today and matter we will be addressing our executive sessions on the Senate bills. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneous listen, and if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar of the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules in New Hampshire RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access this meeting, the meeting will be adjourned as scheduled, and all votes will be taken by roll call vote. So that means while we have all been with each other all morning, we're going to do another roll call vote. Before I do that, I will note, and I'm assuming I'm not hearing from anybody that there's a problem. This microphone has been dutifully moved back and forth up here at the table, but is not on. So I'm going to leave it in its current state as long as everything is proceeding all right as far as people hearing, and I'm not seeing any issue with that. So having said that, I'm going to ask the clerk, Representative Wells, to call the roll.
Representative Bergeron.
I am present. I'm participating remotely from my home in Nashua.
Representative Berry.
I am present in the committee room in Concord.
Representative Cody.
I am here in my home in Nashua.
Representative Freitas.
I am here in my home in Manchester.
Madam Chair.
I'm present.
Representative Groen.
Present in the committee room in Concord.
Representative Hamblett,
I'm present in my home in Portsmouth and my son is in another room.
Representative Hamer,
I'm present in my home in Manchester.
Representative Hayward,
Present in Concord.
Representative Lane,
I am present in my home in Concord. My husband is in another room.
Representative McDonald,
I'm present at the committee room in Concord.
Representative Mooney,
Here at the LOB.
Representative Muirhead,
Present in Hanover, New Hampshire, and alone.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
I'm here in Concord.
Representative Quayle,
I'm here in the committee meeting room in Concord.
Representative Sandler, Representative Sandler,
I am in my home office in Somersworth. My husband and our cats are on the lower level of the house.
Representative Sweeney,
Present.
Representative Terosian,
I'm present in the committee room at the LOB.
Representative Ward,
Here in Portsmouth, family member in the House, and I'm having real trouble hearing, particularly Madam Chair and other people in the committee room.
All right, I'm gonna try and turn the mic in front of me off, so I'm gonna need thumbs up or thumbs down as we proceed. All right, that concludes the roll call. So as I started to say and was thankfully interrupted in regards to notices, the first bill before the committee, as noticed in the calendar, is SB 31 relative to checklists and the absentee ballot envelopes. There was an amendment sent to committee members 2021-1486. Does someone have a motion? Representative Hayward.
I move that we take up the amendment 1586H to SB 31.
Is there a second?
Madam Chairman.
Representative Quayle seconds the motion. Representative Hayward, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment eliminates the pandemic-only sentence and out of place. And the word so vaguely that it's unnecessary as an exception in this context. You should note that the amendment doesn't an elimination of a sentence. The amendment does not show that sentence. If you look at your original version on page 3. Encompasses parts of line 12, 13, and 14.
And your amendment removes that sentence.
A single sentence.
And is the result of that amendment to put the statute in consistent with its current form?
Yes.
All right, questions on the amendment? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Hayward, although the pandemic resulted in the changes, I suppose, to the understanding of what constitutes a disability, the Attorney General's memo, joint memo with the Secretary of State on absentee ballot requesting eligibility stated, had this conclusion: absentee voting is permitted in any circumstance where the voter is under medical advice, whether it is individualized advice or general advice to the public, to avoid being in places like a polling place. So my question is, I have family members, one of who had an organ transplant, another who was in stage 4 cancer, and are under the advice of their doctors to avoid large gatherings of people. Is it your intent to deny those people the right to request an absentee ballot so that they can avoid going to public places?
Thank you for the question. That is not my intent at all. But the action as it currently exists under the emergency orders, unrelated to the standard process that we are talking about here. If there's a requirement that demands an emergency order such as we are currently experiencing, and that is a separate item and a one-off sort of circumstance rather than the general circumstance, which is what should be included in our long-standing laws.
Further question, Madam Chair?
Representative Bergeron.
Representative Hayward, there's nothing in the original bill or your amendment that says anything to do with masks. It just talks about medical conditions. And in the case of the Attorney General's memo, it talks about a person should have the right to request a ballot if they receive individual advice or general advice related to their medical condition to avoid going to public areas like a polling place. In other words, this is not COVID specific. It is not an emergency order specific. It deals with any example or situation where someone might have a medical condition that should enable them to obtain an absentee ballot.
And may I just interject that Representative Hayward, it's your voice is relatively soft, and if you could be near a microphone, it would be helpful.
Okay, I'm now very near a microphone.
Ah, that's
Sorry-
perfect.
Sorry about that.
That's much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
I did not talk about masks at all, so I hope that wasn't a part of what you heard.
I think
So-
just for clarification, there is the law pre-statute, there is the emergency order, and then there is a separate, Representative Bergeron, I believe you're referring to a separate memorandum that was issued in regards to the status of elections that was not specifically part of the emergency.
Correct. I'm referring to a memo dated April 10th, 2020, relative to elections operations during the state of emergency.
Correct, and I understand Representative Hayward's point to be it was operative during a state of emergency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Madam Chair.
Other questions or comments from committee members? And I will say that during the break, I pondered that it is actually much more interesting to sit on the side in these meetings than it is to sit in the front of the room managing it. So there you go. I had my morning off. Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I could hardly hear what Representative Hayward said. So if he could just repeat his answer to Representative Bergeron's, because I'm still not clear on why the sentence needed to be deleted.
I also had great difficulty hearing his response. Thank you.
I would say, rather than try and re-answer, if I return back to the beginning, because Representative Bergeron's question really related to a different document than we are working on, that my amendment to SB 31 is which will become part of the RSA, eliminates a pandemic-only sentence that is out of place in this disability question, and it's worded so vaguely that it is unnecessary as an exception in the normal or standard context.
Thank you, Representative Hayward. Other members?
Can I have a follow-up, please? I'm sorry.
Representative Lane, go ahead.
I guess I don't see anything about the pandemic in the original language. It just talks about a medical condition that poses a risk of infection. So it's not necessarily related to COVID or a pandemic. It just says that in the example he gave, if someone's in stage 4 cancer and they've been told by their doctor not to vote, not to go into public places to vote, without that language, I'm not sure that they qualify as a disability. That's why I like the language, is because it made it clear it wasn't related to COVID at all.
Thank you, Representative Lang. I think the difference in position is noted. I do not recall hearing any testimony, and I did not review the Senate testimony at the public hearing on this, for anybody who had such a condition, which should have been pre-pandemic certainly, and as to Representative Bergeron's example, that felt that the law required them to vote at the polling place and that they wouldn't qualify under the language of disability as it existed prior to the pandemic. I certainly have some concerns about it because of the generic nature of it in regards to, polling places in the winter. And the same risk class for COVID certainly is the same risk class for something such as the flu. I don't want to get into whether you should be in or out with the flu, but I think that for me, that was some concern, and I didn't have any issues with the fact that I felt that somebody in Representative Bergeron's situation would qualify as being disabled, and certainly would have been under a condition where they were not able to leave their house for health reasons under any circumstances, given that the risk of infection was so strong, having some familiarity with people on the treatment. Other questions or comments from committee members? Representative Cody.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm still trying to figure out what Representative Hayward's intent is.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Also, committee members, just for process, if bills are amended today, they will go to a committee of conference. I think if they are passed by the House at session on June 3rd or 4th, I think we're meeting, or 4th or 5th, I can't remember. Amended bills that pass the House will go to a committee of conference. I believe the committee conference is the following week. I believe those committee of conferences are intended to be hybrid. And for purposes of amendment on what we would refer to as our Senate omnibus bills, if a section of a bill is removed or amended, either in any bill or as an omnibus bill, that will not go to the floor to be voted on, which means it can be brought forward again in the second year of this session. So that's just a little procedural note in regards to changes that get made to bills this year, the first year of the session.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, but we don't know anything about whether the Senate will concur with any of these amendments, do we? I mean,
No,
the committee of conference would only occur if the Senate requested one and the House acceded to one. So we really don't know that at this point, do we?
Thank you, Representative Cody. I don't certainly know the Senate position on any of these. So thank you for that clarification. Given the year. All right, is there any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on amendment to SB 31, which is on the floor, 2021 1486H. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
No.
Representative Lane,
Representative Lang?
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting. Actually, yes.
Representative Freitas,
Yes.
Representative Hamblett,
No.
Envelope.
Representative Muirhead,
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay, so 13-7. No.
The amendment carries 13-7. Are there any further amendments that anyone wants to bring forward related to SB 31?
I'm sorry, it's 12-8.
12-8. And vote on the amendment 1486H was 12-8. I'm seeing no further amendments. Is there a motion? Peter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recommend, I move that we ought to pass with amendment SB 31.
Is there a second? Representative Quayle seconds it. Further discussion on the motion?
Oh, shoot.
Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Looney,
Yes.
Representative Torosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
Clark is yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
No.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
No.
Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead,
No.
so it's 12-8.
The motion carries 12-8. SB 31 has been passed as amended. 1486H is the amendment.
Madam Chair,
57.
13-7, I believe.
Again, I messed up.
Representative Lane voted in the affirmative and
10, 11, 12.
another.
You know, I believe that Representative Freitas was recorded as a yes vote on the amendment,
But not,
but not on the overall vote. I'm not sure she intended to do that because I recall hearing her say, oh, no, at one point. But I think that is what the votes were. Is anybody have any other clarification? My understanding is that all Republicans and one Democrat voted for the bill as amended.
2 Democrats. Representative Hamblett,
Representative Hamlet, did you vote for or against that bill?
I voted for the bill.
Okay. All right, thank you. So it was 13-7.
All right, so the amendment was 12-8.
oh, because I didn't call you, that's why. I didn't say Madam Chair, that's fine.
Oh, okay, yes.
I'm having a good day.
Madam Clerk? So first vote was 12-8, the second was 13-7.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have my hand up.
I'm sorry, we were trying to straighten out the vote here. Representative Freitas. Speak
Yes,
up.
I would like to change my vote to yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
and
The whole
that
bill.
I'm taking to be on the bill as amended. So there will be 3 Democrat yes votes, you, Representative Lane, and Representative Hamlet. And I'm seeing nods of agreement.
What's passed that title 14-6?
Correct.
What was I doing?
All right. The next bill before us this morning is SB 46. SB 46 is relative to the use of electronic poll books by cities and towns. It had a public hearing before this committee on March 31st. Is there a motion? Representative Barry,
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move that we ought to pass SB 46.
Representative Sweeney.
Madam Chair, I second that.
It's been moved and seconded to pass SB 46. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Barry?
Yes, Madam Chairman, very briefly. I'm a big fan of electronic poll books. I'm a big fan of modernizing our elections. I believe that electronic poll books in the long run will create shorter lines on election day, because as in most large voting places we go in, names are segregated by your last first initial and your last name, excuse me. So example, I would go to the A through E line. And that creates a problem on election day, because very often there's nobody in the A to D line, and the people who are in through, whatever S have a line backed up. Electronic poll books, that problem is gone. Now it's just a matter of how many workers do we have there? They can process anyone regardless of their last name. So it'll decrease waiting times on election day and make voting easier.
Further discussion on the motion on the floor, which is OTP as to SB 46. Representative Cody.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
We can.
Yes, I would just like to say I'm very happy to see this advancing, having sat here during a good portion of our earlier work on electronic poll books. It's nice to see a positive motion, and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Anybody else on SB 46? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is OTP SB 46.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
Yes.
Representative Ward,
Yes.
Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
Yes.
Representative Hamer,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
Yes.
Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
0.
The vote on OTP SB 46 was 20-0. If there's no objection, that will go on the consent calendar. So that will be consent. SB 54 is the next bill in front of this committee. This is relative to the absentee ballot application form. The public hearing on this bill was March 31st. Is there a motion on SB 43? Representative Terosian.
I make a motion, Madam Chair, to retain Senate Bill 54.
Is there a second?
I second that, Madam Chair.
Representative Rowan seconds it. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Terosian?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. While as mentioned the bill, I like there's still some things that need to be sorted out. It's the reason to retain the bill, to work on it. Some have to do with identification. And on the last page of the bill, under 657:6A, as absentee ballot application procedures, so forth, to go down through that. The section in there that refers to or talks about identification. One of them is any other information or records that the town clerk may verify. So some of this needs to be better defined, and I'm confident with retaining the bill, we can work this out and bring something back that's more specific. That's all I have.
Is there further discussion on this motion, which is to retain? I would also just point out that this committee has retained, I think, a parallel or similar bill, HB 144. Representative Cody.
Somewhat along the lines of the previous speaker, I have some problems with some of this, but I certainly agree that is a good candidate for retention. It has some serious problems over and above those that I'm referring to. So I will be voting to retain the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is to retain SB 54.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
yes,
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
Yes.
Representative Ward,
Yes.
Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
yes,
Representative Hamer,
yes,
Representative Lane,
yes,
Representative Freitas,
yes,
Representative Hamblett,
yes,
Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Okay, 20-0.
SB 54 is retained. The next bill before us this morning, this afternoon, is SB 83. SB 83 had a public hearing on April 23rd. This is our first consideration of an omnibus bill from the Senate. It has 5 parts. As we did so during the public hearing, I'm going to proceed through these omnibus bills by part, taking motions by part, looking for a motion at the end of the considerations of the individual parts for the motion as a whole. So part 1 of SB 83 deals with the qualification of certain persons from performing duties as an election official. There is an amendment that has been sent to the committee. It is amendment number 2021 1481. Is there a motion?
I move that amendment up to pass, Madam Chairman.
Representative McDonald moves 1481H. Is there a second?
I second that, Madam Chair.
Representative Rowan seconds it. Representative McDonald, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman. While we understand some of the concerns about potential conflicts of interest and so forth, the fact is that moderators and graders in particular have a constitutional duty as enumerated, specified in the New Hampshire State Constitution to perform their function. There is no provision for them to do otherwise. They have these responsibilities. It's not clear they can delegate them. And this is regardless of what office they might be seeking. It's problematic that they be disqualified or in some way limited. We've heard from the Secretary of State, he's indicated there's never been a problem, and that by all indications, all moderators are acting appropriately, balance their duties well. So for that reason, I introduced this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on this amendment? I would just like to clarify, I do think we heard that there are people who have raised this as an issue. What this means is that moderators can be present within the guardrail when they are on the ballot for any office. And there have been complaints made, but it is an issue that we have been grappling with for many sessions, and it's just not clear to me that this is the right solution. Any further discussion? Representative Cody.
Yes, I'll be opposing the amendment because I've always felt that if you're on the ballot, you don't need to be anywhere near the counting of ballots. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call a roll. The motion on the floor is OTP 1481.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
yes,
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Cody.
Yes.
No, Representative Cody, if we could see you for your no vote, please.
Hold on one second, Madam Chair.
Just getting with the program here. I don't think anybody has any question as to what's going on. There you are, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Bergeron.
No.
Representative Sandler. Representative Sandler.
Representative Sandler.
I don't see her.
I think she dropped off.
All right, maybe she'll call back in. Why don't we continue with the roll?
Representative Hamer.
No.
Representative Lane.
No.
Representative Freitas.
No.
Representative Hamblett.
No.
Representative Muirhead.
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So 11 to 8.
11 to 8. I just want to ask again, is Representative Sandler on the line? Pam, I'm showing a Dan Mason, but that's just somebody who's showing up for being on the Zoom, right?
Yes, I don't know why he's showing up on your screen. He's not in the panelist list, he's in the attendees. So it's,
Okay, that's all right. That happens occasionally. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't Representative Sandler by another name. because I know that-
He would make an excellent committee member, though, Madam Chair.
I think he would be very valuable to me. All right, all right, any other motions on part 1 of SB 83? Okay, part 2 of SB 83 deals with the establishment of an election information portal. There is an amendment that has been proposed in regards to part 2. Is there a motion?
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
A motion, Madam Chair, to adopt amendment 2021-1480H, essentially deletes part 2 of the omnibus cost bill.
Is there a second?
Second that, Madam Chairman.
Representative Barry seconds it. Representative Terosian, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. While there are parts of this that certainly have merit, and if this was a separate bill, we retain it, work on it. But because it is part of an omnibus bill, we can't do that. And we heard testimony that there is no, well, we know there's no fiscal note on it. We heard testimony that we don't know what this is going to cost to do, and that it was unrealistic to get this done by the date that was proposed in this section. The best thing to do is delete that out of the omnibus bill, because that won't be ideal. If somebody wants to bring it back next year, they can certainly do that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Representative Lane.
I would be curious as to, other than the date, which was January 1st, 2002, what the other provisions are that were problematic.
I'd be glad to speak to that if I may.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you. The time to implement was one of them, and the other was the fact that it needs to go to informational, the Hampshire IT department. And so I don't believe they're equipped at this time to do this. So based on some testimony we had on this. So for those reasons, it would be prudent to pass it as it's written.
Is there further discussion on it? And as Representative Terosian points out, if things that are deleted but not voted on by the House floor remain items to be considered by the House. I'm not seeing any further discussion on the bill. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is amended to SB 83 number 1480H.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Hayward.
Yes.
Representative Mooney. Yes. Representative Rosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
no,
Representative Lane,
No.
Representative Freitas,
no,
Representative Hamblett,
No.
Representative Muirhead.
No.
Is that a yes?
No, that's a no.
Oh, okay. Madam Chair.
Yes,
Okay.
don't worry, Representative Muirhead, I got this.
So 11 to 9.
So 1480H passes 11 to 9. The next section of SB 83 is part 3, to recount fees. Is there anybody who has any amendment to part 3 of SB 83? Any discussion on part 3? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move on to part 4. Part 4 is relative to statements filed by political committees and candidates. The committee members should have an amendment in front of them, which should be 1188H. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move that we amend SB 83 to include amendment 1888H.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Motion is seconded by Representative Wells. Representative Berry, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman, this highly controversial amendment makes the minimum submission for a online or facsimile, a copy of a campaign finance report. It takes it from a minimum of 8-point font to a minimum of 12-point font, because I am getting older and my eyes not as good as they used to be.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? The amendment number is 1188H.
Madam Chair, I couldn't hear the motion.
Representative Ward, it's 1188H
Yeah, I got that.
to increase the font size. If you're looking at the original bill.
Yeah, I got that.
It
Was it
amends.
OTP or ITL?
Pardon me?
Was it OTP or ITL? I couldn't hear his motion.
No, the motion is to amend the 8-point font size to 12.
Seems like government overreach to me, but I don't. The nanny state strikes again.
Not bad.
All right, is there any further discussion on the amendment which is on the floor? It is 1188. 1188H, all right, I'm not seeing any further discussion. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
yes,
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
20 years ago, I would have voted no, but I vote yes.
Representative Ward.
Oh,
Serious? Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
Yes.
Representative Hamer,
yes,
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
yes,
Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead,
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
19 to 1.
Vote carries 19 to 1. So 1188H has passed as an amendment to section part 4 of SB 83. Are there any further motions in regards to part 4? SB 83. I'm seeing none. Part 5 of SB 83 is relating to town meeting procedures. You should have received proposed amendment number 1417H. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we pass Amendment 2021-1417H to SB 83.
Is there a second?
To second the motion, Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian, second said. Representative Brown, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The current language in Section 5 it changed the word years, year apostrophe S to years, which is S apostrophe, and that left some uncertainty as to which fiscal year was referred to, whether it was the immediately preceding fiscal year or if it was any preceding fiscal year. This amendment clarifies that by simply stating that it's for appropriations and expenditures which were approved for the same purposes for the immediately preceding fiscal period.
Thank you. Representative Lane, you have your hand up.
Yes, I would have a question. The last word of the amendment, should it not be year instead of period? I understand, the purpose of the amendment and but based on the conversations that we were having, I just thought it might be better to be consistent to use the word fiscal year instead of fiscal period, since we haven't really used that before and it's not used in other parts of the statute, to my knowledge.
I can speak to that.
You can go
Madam
ahead,
Chair.
Representative Brown.
In the case of towns, they are single fiscal years. In the fiscal period, in this case, will always refer to a fiscal year because that is what the towns refer to. We could have used the language either way. I could have put that in, but this is what I received from the legislative services, and it does refer to, in this case, a fiscal year because that's what all the towns operate.
I agree with Attorney Lane that it might have been here, but I think that we were trying to get away from the confusion, and OLS might have taken it to an extra degree, but I think it's understandable. I don't think there's any question as to what the intent was. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
No.
Representative Blaine,
No.
Representative Freitas,
No.
Representative Hamblett,
No.
Representative Muirhead,
No.
11-9.
Chair votes yes.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
All right, the amendment passes 11-9. Are there any further motions in regard to SB 83? In regards to amendments? I'm seeing none. Is there a motion on SB 83? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I make a motion for OTP on Senate Bill 83 as amended.
Second.
And the amendments you're referring to are?
And the amendments I'm referring to are amendment 1481H, 1480H, 1188H, and 1417H.
It's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Rosian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I believe, we knew when we first got these omnibus bills that it's challenging sometimes to be able to, there was some reaction from some people just to I think the best job we could do, modifying or amending the bill to pass the good parts out of the bill. Just to kind of go over a quick summary on part one. We guide to disqualifying people from election officials at the town level. While I agree with some of my colleagues on this, that I don't like to see somebody that's running for office be in that position. I can tell you in one of my towns in my district, both the moderator, there we go, having a senior moderator and the assistant moderator are both House members. And further, the fact that the Constitution is very clear on that, we really couldn't, good conscience, change that. I gave the reasons on section 2 as to why that we should delete that. Anybody in the House is free to bring forward that bill as a separate bill going forward the next year. We got to recount fees, that brings it in those fees in line, makes it more responsible for costs associated. It still probably doesn't cover all the costs, but at least it covers more. And in regard to itemized statements filed by political candidates, the amendment certainly makes those reports more legible and readable. If you have to file the reports, they certainly ought to be readable. And lastly, the last section, providing for actual town meeting procedures. We heard this was needed for towns that are on a fiscal year, not a calendar year, and particularly in this COVID year where some town meetings were later in the year. I think it was a very common sense amendment that it simply clarified what was somewhat of a vague statement that requires the purposes of appropriations and expenditures which were approved for the same purposes for the immediately preceding fiscal period. It makes it clear. It was somewhat vague and not quite clear before. So for all those reasons, I made the motion, and I hope you support the motion to OTP Senate Bill 83 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Terosian. Does anybody else wish to speak to the amendment? I mean, the motion on the floor, which is SB 83 as amended. I'm seeing no further comments or hands, so I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Barry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
Clark is yes, Representative Cody,
Yes.
Representative Ward,
Yes.
Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
Yes.
Representative Hamer,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
Yes.
Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead,
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
8-0.
If there's no objection,
Move consent.
SB 83 will go on the consent agenda. Thank you. The next and last bill before the committees for consideration this year is SB 89. This had a public hearing on April 23rd, and it had a public hearing today on a non-germane amendment. This was omnibus legislation relative to election procedures. and registrars, of probate. This came out of the Senate Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee, as we did with 83. For SB 89, we will go through by parts. Part 1 has to do with the city chief elections officers. Are there comments, or I'm not aware of, but there may be amendments for part 1 of SB 89? I'm not seeing any. So we will move on to part 2 of SB 89. I'm not aware of any amendments. Does any member have an amendment? Does any committee member wish to speak at this time to part 2 of SB 89? I'm not seeing any. Part 3 of SB 89 deals with primarily the processing of pre-processing of ballots. I am going to recognize Representative Bergeron. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to propose amending Senate Bill 89 with Amendment 2021-1255H, and would like to speak to that motion.
Is there a second to Representative Bergeron?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Representative Cody. This was an amendment that was prepared and the committee has previously spoken to Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick because we did discuss this previously. What the amendment tries to do is preserve Senator Gray's intent that absentee ballot applications and affidavit envelopes would be examined for every election, every municipal and state election, in an effort to try and determine if a voter's paperwork was filled out improperly, and to make an effort to try and contact the voter to give them an opportunity to cure their affidavit ballot, to use the court's language and Senator Gray's language. But we did have problems with some of the logistics involved in making this happen, and those are what I tried to address in the amendment. For example, on page 2, lines 20 to 27 in the original bill, there was a provision that the clerk should have to post a time and location of every time that this review would occur within 24 hours prior to the review. But in the same paragraph, it says that anytime someone's voting in person, that review takes place immediately. There was also a provision that a review would be taken place at 5 o'clock the night after 5 o'clock the night before an election. Even if there were problems with ballots, there'd be no way to contact the person to have that corrected, because the offices would be closed. The election day is the next day, and the absentee voter would have to presumably go to the polls to vote, because there would be no way for them to make the correction on it. And finally, under state law, it's the moderator who makes the final determination as to whether or not the paperwork was properly completed, not the clerk. So that also was addressed in the amendment. That's the purpose of the amendment, to try and preserve Senator Gray's primary intent, but try and make it in a logistically feasible, make it a logistically feasible process.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Before I ask the clerk to call the roll, I'm going to say that I appreciate Representative Bergeron's attempt to clear up some issues with that part of the SB 89, because I do think it does clean it up, but I think that the pre-processing process itself is fraught with issues, and I have serious concerns and wanted to go forward with the process that, as a member of the Secure Elections Committee last year, were recommended because of the COVID pandemic, but there was specific discussion, and I certainly made it clear that that recommendation was for the COVID issue, that the case was, the state was addressing, and I don't think that the current practice makes sense going forward. So I just want to make it clear on the record that I do think while Representative Bergeron's amendment might clean up some pieces of it, I have issues with the part of the bill in it. So I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. Representative Rowan.
Could I add a comment to that? I also like much of what's in here. My main concern with section 3 is that I believe it creates classes of voters. Those that have their ballots corrected, which basically the absentee voters, and those that can't. And for that reason, I am not in favor of section 3.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Madam Chair. When we have a different situation in the world where COVID is not as high of a concern, the concerns addressed in this bill and this bill will dissipate. And so we can revisit that if we find that they don't.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll now.
Representative McDonald,
No.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
No.
Representative Sweeney,
No.
Representative Hayward,
No.
Representative Mooney,
No.
Representative Terosian,
No.
Representative Berry,
No.
Representative Groen,
No.
Representative Quayle,
No.
clerk is no. Representative Cody,
Yes.
Representative Ward,
Yes.
Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
Yes.
Representative Hamer,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
Yes.
Representative Freitas,
I believe she's left for a while. She had to leave.
Thank you.
Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead, Representative Muirhead,
You can unmute.
Sorry, yes.
Madam Chair,
No.
so it'd be 13-7. No, 11.
11-7. Excuse me, is it 11-7 or 7-11?
1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. 8 yeses.
8-11, the motion fails. We also have amendment 1323H to part 3. Their motion.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move amendment 1323H ought to pass.
Representative Berry moves 1323H. Is it second?
I second the motion, Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian seconds. Representative Berry, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman, very briefly. As actually mentioned in Representative Bergeron's, some commentary, Representative Bergeron's amendment, the pre-processing process is itself rife with issues. I do, for the record, appreciate Representative Bergeron's hard work on that. I do think that was good faith and well executed. Unfortunately, pre-processing does create different classes of voters. It creates classes of voters who send in their absentee ballot a month out. It creates a class of voters who, with voters who send their absentee ballot without time to be looked at. As I said when we were doing the hearing on this omnibus bill, I am a firm believer that in New Hampshire, as much of election day has to happen on election day as possible. We're using, I'm aware the municipal association have asked for this for some time, but for the most part, we've been using the pandemic as the excuse to bring this forward, acting as if there's going to be all these absentee ballots forever going on in perpetuity. And the reality is we will begin to return to normal. We will have a midterm election. Our very capable election workers will be able to handle this. And we're going to find other ways to free them up on election day. We just moved forward electronic poll books. That will free up people to handle absentee ballots on election day. So we should be, New Hampshire, we do election on election day. And that's the point of my amendment is we're going to keep election on election day.
Is there further discussion? Representative Ward. Representative Ward, you have your hand up.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? It is amendment number 2021-1323H. Representative Cody.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll be opposing the amendment because I happen to believe that if we can give our hardworking local officials an opportunity to pre-process ballots, we ought to do that. And we ought to fix the problems that exist. And we attempted to do that as well. And that's why I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the vote. The motion on the floor is amendment to SB 89, amendment number 2021-1323H.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhoe O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes, Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
no,
Representative Lane,
No,
Representative Freitas. She's not present. She's not present. Representative Hamblett,
No.
Representative Muirhead,
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes. The motion carries 11-8. Are there any further motions on part 3? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to part 4. Part 4 is in regards as entitled Establishing a Committee to Study Post-Election Audit Counting Devices and further authorizations in regards to audits and recounts. I have amendment number 1505. I don't have any other amendments to this section of the bill. Do I have a motion? Representative
I
Terosian.
have a motion, Madam Chair. Include amendment 2021-1505H.
Is there a second?
I will second that, Madam Chair.
Representative Hayward seconds it. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Terosian?
Certainly, Madam Chair, and thank you. So here's a concept under part 4, the title of part 4, establishing a committee to study post-election audit counting devices. So what this amendment does is it makes it a study committee to do just what the title says. While there were certain aspects, other aspects of that section that I liked, there were some troubling contradictions, and there was also in some cases it gave broader powers than the legislature intended to do. Granted a tremendous amount of power to the Attorney General's office, and it seems to me the best way to address this issue is to study and come up with something that's I think written a little bit better than this section was in its entirety. Hence the reason to amend it. Let's start with a study committee and see where it takes us. Thank you.
Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote in opposition to the proposed amendment primarily because, and I understand which provisions of that section that Representative Terosian is referring to, and in some ways I agree with him on that aspect of it. But the Secretary of State's office just recently conducted a study of the use of high-speed optical digital scan ballot counting devices. And I've yet to hear a good justification as to why we need another study group to do essentially the same thing. Its effect will really be to delay the implementation of any kind of post-election audit counting another year. And I don't see a valid reason for just continuing to kick this issue down the road. It's time to start making these post-election audits happen, and therefore I can't support another study committee on top of a study committee that just finished its work.
Further discussion? I will just say I myself was a little confused on the study committee. I believe last year's study committee was Senator Graybill, and as Representative Bergeron has provided the committee with a report from that. However, in light of things happening with the state, my hope is that the committee goes forward and generates a report. They are capable of doing it before November 30th. And there are, I suspect, other bills that will be recommending things to go forward for the second year of this session. Further comments on this amendment? The amendment is 1505H and it's to SB 89 Part 4. I'm seeing none, so I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Rosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Rowan,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
Clark is yes, Representative Cody,
No,
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No,
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
No.
Representative Lane,
No.
Representative Freitas not here, Representative Hamblett,
No,
Representative Muirhead,
no.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So it'll be 11 to 8.
Are there any further motions or discussion on Part 4 of SB 89? Seeing none, so I'm going to move on to Part 5. Part 5 of SB 89 is relative to the duties of the Registrar of Probate. I do have an amendment. Committee members should also have an amendment. Amendment number 1390H. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move that amendment 1398 be passed.
Representative McDonald moves OTP on 1390H to amend SB 89. Is there a second?
A second that.
It's been seconded by Representative Wells. Is Representative McDonald, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. The current system with the paid and a carefully trained clerk of probate.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I'm having great difficulty hearing Representative McDonald.
I'm going to move this over. See if it picks up.
Sorry about that, Representative Cody. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Representative Cody?
Very well, actually.
Okay. I feel like I'm doing a cell phone commercial. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? That's, thank you for bringing that to my attention, though. Again, the current system regarding this whole probate issue with a paid and carefully and well-trained clerk of probate has been working very well in the last decade since it was passed. This bill in particular, this amendment to try to reverse that, should have a fiscal note. It does not. There's a question about whether it would generate the funding provision would be effective. There's no training for what individual who is often just a party activist of either party. There's no indication that person would be qualified or be properly trained once they came in. There's no staff to help this person once they arrive. There's no office for them to sit in. And I know that it's in the Constitution, that's been a concern, but there have also been numerous attempts to remove it from the Constitution, which I would encourage continue. Also, this is not even something appropriate to election law, so that's another thing that I think we should consider.
Is there any further discussion on Part 4? Why don't you leave it sort of more towards you? For some reason, my voice gets picked up all right, so we'll leave it closer to you. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Representative Barry.
Yes, I am ultimately going to be supporting this amendment, but it's very, I'm not excited about it. I am a big proponent of returning this position back to the people. I think people should have the ability to seek redress when possible. And the judiciary system is designed, as I said in the testimony, in the hearings, the judiciary system is designed to be immovable. I do not like that. This position, whether we like it or not, is in our state's constitution. Attempts to remove it from the state constitution have failed, which should be a message. People want this. Unfortunately, this part of this omnibus bill really has no business in part of election law. It really should have gone to judiciary or to municipal and county. And I'm not deaf to the political reality that if this stays in here, 89 overall will fail because the issue of the registrar of probate has typically been nonpartisan. So you'll take election law bills, which tend to go down the party line, although I don't thank everybody for the font size increase earlier, and then you'll tack on a nonpartisan issue inside of it, effectively assuring its. So I'm going to vote in favor of this amendment, but I want to state for the record, I believe that people elect a registrar, that registrar should have duties. It's in our constitution, and if we don't like that, we should actually remove it from the constitution.
Further discussion on amendment 1398, 2021, for part 5 of SB 89.
Madam Chair.
Representative Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am troubled that those duties went over to the circuit court and that they're not being done at the county level where the Constitution says they should. And there has not been a constitutional amendment that passed that allows that. However, my concern is that the way that part of the bill is crafted, the money's not there for them to handle those duties. So I too will vote in favor of that amendment. However, I'll remind the public and committee members that because we're removing this amendment, anybody can bring forth a bill to address this, and I hope somebody does, because I certainly would support that as long as the funding is there. And if you heard another comment that this section really does belong before the Judiciary Committee. So if somebody brings forth a standalone bill on this, it will get, I'm sure, a fair hearing in the Judiciary. And for those reasons, I'm going to support the amendment, but reluctantly because of the constitutional aspect of this.
Further discussion on the amendment before the House Committee on Election, which is to take out part 5 of HB 89. I'm seeing none, so I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Torres,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes, Representative Cody,
Yes.
Representative Ward,
Yes.
Representative Bergeron,
Yes.
Representative Sandler,
Yes.
Representative Hamer, yes, Representative Lane.
Yes.
Great decision. Okay, Representative Hamblett,
Yes.
Representative Muirhead,
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
11-8.
Amendment 1390H has been adopted as to SB 89-11-8.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
did I hear incorrectly? I thought everybody voted yes on that.
Was
on the-
Representative
Oh, yeah.
Freitas back?
Yeah, 19-0.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes,
You
it's
may be getting a
very-
little ahead of yourself, Madam Clerk. I don't know.
It's very warm in here.
Yeah, it really is. They have, be glad you're not here. They haven't figured out the heating system.
About 76, 78. Okay, 19-0. Thank you.
I believe the count on 1390 was
19-0.
19-0. All right, the next, are there any further amendments to part 5? The next amendment before the committee is the non-germane amendment that was heard this morning, 1445H, and I'm going to ask Representative McDonald, Vice Chair, to conduct the vote on that bill. Representative McDonald.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Do we have a motion on this bill? Amendment number 1445H.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a motion. I move that amendment 1445H be ought to pass.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I second that motion.
Representative Perry, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, today we heard extensive testimony about Amendment 1445H, and we have received hundreds of emails. Unfortunately, this amendment is very necessary, but it shouldn't be. We should not have to assert our right as a state to push back against the federalization of our elections. DC politicians feel that they can run our elections better than we can. Even though we have some of the loosest election laws in the country, SB 1, or the so-called For the People Act, would actually make them even looser. If the DC politicians who crafted this bill were accurately naming it, they would have called it the For the Politicians Act because of the extreme giveaways in it, such as a taxpayer funding of political campaigns. Today, I asked several times where our federal delegation is. Why couldn't they be bothered to come and speak about this amendment and the For the People Act? Not even one submitted a written statement or sent a surrogate to speak on their behalf. We also heard today that none of them have spoken to the Secretary of State's office about how this would affect New Hampshire or why they are supporting it. I find the arguments against this amendment to be incredibly disingenuous. First, they tell us that we will be costing the state a lot of money and being forced to hold 2 elections. Let's be clear about something. The only people who are forcing the state to do anything is our federal delegation in Washington, D.C., who, despite spending the last 7 months telling us how great the New Hampshire election was, now are catering to their out-of-state donors and trying to undermine New Hampshire's process. Next, they tell us that we will be making it more confusing for voters. But let's be serious for a minute. The only one proposing real changes to how we vote are the politicians peddling S1, telling us how great it will be to turn over control of our elections to unelected bureaucrats. Finally, they tell us that the federal government has the right to run our elections. This is the core of our disagreement. Who should control our elections? Is it New Hampshire or DC bureaucrats? For me, the answer is clear. I pick New Hampshire every time. I will choose Secretary Gardner over Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer every single time. I would like to address one thing out there that is not true. On April 11th, Senator Hassan went on WMUR and said, quote, "The For the People Act, it really doesn't change the way New Hampshire would run its elections. The way it runs its elections already fits the requirement." But the senator is either lying or ignorant as to the effects of S1. S1 would dramatically change.
Madam Chairman, point of order. I would submit that the gentleman's previous remarks relative to the senator are out of order.
They are my remarks. It is not true from what we've heard from the Secretary of State's office. S1 would dramatically change how New Hampshire conducts our elections. It would require us to allow ballot harvesting up to 10 days after the election.
Mr. Chairman,
IDs.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, you did not rule on my point of order.
It's noted, Representative Cody.
Does that mean you ruled on it?
Well, Representative Berry has already made that comment. It's already It's already out there.
Well, yeah, but my point is that his comment relative to Senator Hassan is out of order.
I'll take that under advisement, Representative Tony. I'm not prepared to make the ruling at this time.
May I finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
S1 would dramatically change how New Hampshire conducts our elections. It would require us to allow ballot harvesting up to 10 days after the election. And it would ban voter ID, which is extremely popular, including with support of over 50% of Democrats. The committee members who are about to vote against this have spent the last 6 months telling us New Hampshire elections are well run. So why are they now not standing with us under the very simple proposition that New Hampshire should continue to run its own elections? The same ones that we're claiming are so well run. Let's be very clear about the vote we're about to take. We will get to see where we as committee members stand. Do we stand with New Hampshire and our voting institutions, or do we side with DC politicians? This is a battle of choice, and the options are as plain as day. Do you stand with a congresswoman from San Francisco and a senator from New York City, or do you stand with the people of the Granite State and the voters that elected you to your office?
Thank you, Representative Barry. Representative Cody, you have your hand up.
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I would be opposing this amendment. It's hard to know where to start with the remarks of the previous speaker. So I guess I will address simply the reasons I'm going to vote as I am. Number one, which has not been addressed this morning, except by, I believe, one speaker. I believe the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, were some version of HR 1 to pass, would control. That does not mean that there is not an ability to adjust HR 1 before its final version to take into account the problems that New Hampshire may have or that other states may have. In fact, that's going on right now. And if the previous speaker wasn't interested in making cheap political points, he could be talking to those senators that he referred to and discussing his issues so they could be adjusted before the end of this process. I think, frankly, that this entire farrago is an embarrassment, and I will be opposing the amendment. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cody, Representative Muirhead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm about whether committee members who support this amendment because they think that some proposed legislation in the national legislature represents an unjustified federal regulation of state elections, would also oppose the 1965 Voting Rights Act for the same reason. Or whether they support the Voting Rights Act but oppose this new legislation. That might be possible, but I don't see why the principle would apply to one but not the other. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 made it illegal for the states, as you well know, to apply literacy tests to qualify voters, poll taxes to qualify voters. It even sent federal officials into counties in a variety of southern states to directly register citizens to vote. It was almost like a reoccupation of the former Confederacy in 1965. And you know, the provisions of SB 1, which I understand reasonable people could very, very much disagree with for all sorts of reasons, don't seem to involve a federal regulation, what seem to be rather tepid regulation of state elections in comparison to the 1965 Civil Rights Act. So I just wonder, would you support that, the Civil Rights Act, but oppose this, or do they fall together? Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. As a Republican, I can say, even though I was not born in 1965, I would support the Voting Rights Act as it was supported by mostly Republicans at that time. And I find it interesting in the testimony today that we were told over and over again to discuss our concerns with the For the People Act with our senators. than hoping to randomly run into them at the supermarket or something, I don't know how we can better do that, other than asking them to come here and discuss their support for that bill here with us. Or to send some sort of communication to us, and that was not done. What I did instead was I reached out to my local election officials, the people who run the elections on the ground, and I simply texted them and I said, how do you feel about the For the People Act? They oppose it, using some language, some of it was a little spicy. I'll just say they think it stinks. Okay, that was what they said. And I'll just leave it there, and I will be supporting my local election officials on the ground to get the job done here in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Yes, Representative Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I find a couple of aspects.
Excuse me, I really can't hear. I can hardly hear Representative Prudhomme O'Brien, and I just can't hear.
Can you hear me better now?
Mm-hmm.
The microphone had moved. Thank you. Anyway, I'm speaking in favor of the amendment and for the reason why I'm in favor of the amendment, why it's needed. And in order to address that, I really need to speak about HR 1 and S1. I find it deeply troubling that our federal delegation has been silent with their response. Quite frankly, the lack of response is deafening. New Hampshire House hasn't had any conversation with them. New Hampshire Senate hasn't had any conversation with them. We heard testimony today that the Municipal Association has not heard from them. They're an interested party. As the Secretary of State's office has not. We heard testimony from them pass on this, how they very much oppose that legislation. Again, HR 1 and S1 are in direct conflict with the New Hampshire Constitution. In regard to reaching out, I did contact my senators and my House member, and I have not got a response back. Maybe I will, but I have not at this point. So I have been proactive as a citizen. I did that. So in light of the total lack of responsiveness on our federal delegation to address some serious concerns with the legislation, again, not all of it's bad, but there's many pieces of it that are troubling. There's pieces of it, again, that violate the Constitution. And we heard testimony today that New Hampshire, we did it right for the most part. I don't think we need the federal government coming in and dictating, micromanaging every little bit and piece of how we run our election. So for those reasons, I will be supporting the amendment.
Representative Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The U.S. Constitution specifically assigns the responsibility for establishing election procedures to state legislatures. This whole bill S1 is about election procedures. The Constitution does not say the federal legislature has that responsibility. It does not say the courts have that responsibility, nor the attorneys general. And our state constitution also speaks to our responsibility as a legislature to establish the procedures for elections. And for that reason, I will enthusiastically support this amendment.
Thank you, Representative Cohen. Representative Barry, did you have your hand up earlier?
I believe Representative Roche covered my points.
Okay. Any other discussion on this motion? Okay, so the motion is not.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Griffin.
I just want to point out a couple of things. This was not intended on my part, and I will say this because it was raised a couple of times, as a poison pill. To be honest, those of you who I would hope who know me have not seen me do such a thing, and I may not do such a thing.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, could you speak into a microphone?
Nobody can hear it.
I thought we had somebody down here from IT that cleared this stuff up, but apparently not. This was not intended as a poison pill by any means, but done by me in light of what has occurred. We can talk about contacting our representatives to make a change in the bill, but reality, at the federal level, this bill deals with three things, three distinct parts. As I said in my testimony introducing the bill, it deals with voting, it deals with campaign finance, and it deals with ethics. And election security is also part of the bill. Part one of the bill could easily be taken out of the bill. If parties want, if individuals want to go on about dark money in campaigns and getting it out, which I find interesting from our sitting senator who has recently commented on it, having received the most money from out of state in any Senate election in history, that's fine. I did not purposely comment on those aspects because I think there is some history that clearly indicates things like the Ross, the McCain Finance Act have already been in place in regards to federal financing of elections, and we don't have a lot at a state level to do with that. This was brought forward because this bill is making its way through the House and Senate in Washington. It made it through the House without any changes, and the Senate, in a committee meeting, had a number of amendments proposed to it, none of which were adopted. Now, I heard testimony this morning that there might be some changes, for example, to exempt polling places of less than 3,000. That doesn't really help New Hampshire. It may help places like LA. LA County has 10.3 million people. And I point that out because the reality is New Hampshire conducts its elections substantially different than the rest of the country. One of our representatives routinely says New Hampshire is either first or last in everything. Well, New Hampshire is sort of unique in that we maintain the New England traditions of town meetings, and we have a constitution that I believe was established 5 or 6 years before the federal constitution. We do not vote by county. The majority of the rest of the country votes by county, which why it makes provisions of S1 as to making sure there are drop boxes in rural areas that are accessible. Tell me, how do we resolve that provision in Coos County? Queens, New York is 2.2 million. I bring up those two counties because those are, of course, counties and states of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who are big proponents of this bill. And I would just say that we do not do things like other states, and to ask New Hampshire to somehow chip away to continue how we do things in the face of county and states with those kind of numbers is simply not realistic. This is not intended for grandstanding. This is intended to allow our communities to continue to conduct elections in a manner that they have done so. I don't take opening shots. It's not my style, and it's not intended to be one. It is a recognition of the reality of what is going on in what unfortunately has become a more partisan arena. If people were truly interested in the campaign finance piece and truly interested in the ethics piece, they'd be agreeing that part one of the bill should simply be deleted. So my bill is intended to make sure that it's deleted as to New Hampshire. And I want to thank the committee members for indulgence. I usually try to avoid bringing forward bills or amendments, but here we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Griffin and Representative Cody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we do things differently in New Hampshire. And yes, the federal legislation, as with issues in any state, should be examined to see if there are any adjustments that can be made. And we've had testimony that the adjustments are being looked at this point. I would point out that there's been much more attention in the case of the majority party to certain Democratic political people holding power at this moment in Washington than there has been to the legal aspects of what this bill seeks to do, which is very simply to violate the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution. You haven't heard anybody talking about that because I assume they know that the choices are either violate it or have two separate systems, which they have no ability to determine how much it will cost, how long it will take, but they would rather, once again, and I'm not referring to any individual, but people can make their own judgments about the amount of attention that certain individuals and personalities have taken up in this hearing. And so once again, I will oppose that amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Cody. Any other discussion on this amendment? Representative Groen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just respond that the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution does not allow the federal legislature to violate the U.S. Constitution. And that's what it would be doing in this case.
I have a question for Representative Groen, if you'll yield to the question.
Well,
go ahead. Representative Cody?
Yes, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Groen yields.
Oh, thank you. Do you believe that the Congress of the United States violated the Supremacy Clause when it passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965?
the Voting Rights Act was a civil rights act that dealt with excluding people from voting. This is a process that is telling states how to run their elections. And I realize that there is some crossover between the two, but I think there is a distinctly different aspect to those two bills.
I guess that's what we'll find out, but we find that out in a court of law. We don't find that out here. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Representative Stein.
I just quickly want to thank Representative Griffin for bringing this amendment forward. I joined the others of our committee. I do hope we do hear something from our federal delegation before they vote. The two members that have yet to vote on S1 or HR1, before they do, I hope they listen to the discussion we've had today as a committee. They read the articles that are going to be written about it, and can send us some form of information as to their support of this or what changes they want to see. And I would urge them to listen to the people of New Hampshire. We had hundreds of emails of people who didn't sign up on the sign-in sheet that I think we also need to consider when voting for this amendment, that are in support of this amendment, that do want to make sure New Hampshire is writing New Hampshire's election laws. And I hope our federal delegation is listening and takes that under advisement. And I would urge all the committee members to vote for this amendment. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. Any other discussion on this amendment? Okay. So the motion before the committee at this time is a motion of ought to pass on amendment 2021-1425H. I'll ask the clerk to call roll.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward,
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk says yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer, Representative Hamer? I don't see her.
Oh, yes, she
She's
is.
frozen.
Representative Hamer, you're there.
Yes, I lost my internet connection for a minute. I'm voting no.
Thank you. Representative Lane?
No.
No for Representative Freitas. Representative Hamblett?
No.
Representative Muirhead? Representative Muirhead?
No, I'm sorry. No.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
It should be 11-8 this time. 11-8. Yeah.
Are there any other amendments for SB 89? Is there a motion on SB 89?
Yes,
Representative Barrett.
yes, Madam Chairman. I move that SB 89 be ought to pass as amended, amendments 1323H, 1505H, 1390H, and 1445H.
Is there a second?
I second that motion, Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian seconds it. Is there discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any. We discussed it in its parts as the amendments came forward. Not seeing any further discussion. I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is SB 89 OTP as amended.
Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Sweeney,
Yes.
Representative Hayward.
Yes.
Representative Mooney,
Yes.
Representative Terosian,
Yes.
Representative Berry,
Yes.
Representative Groen,
Yes.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
clerk is yes. Representative Cody,
No.
Representative Ward,
No.
Representative Bergeron,
No.
Representative Sandler,
No.
Representative Hamer,
no,
Representative Lane,
No.
Representative Hamblett,
No.
Representative Muirhead,
No.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
11 to 8.
SB 89 as amended has passed 11 to 8. I want to thank committee members for sitting through with this morning without a lunch break. This concludes this committee's business for this first year of the session in regards to bills that have come out of the House or Senate. There will be one remaining piece of business to do, which is to discuss bills that are being amended by the Senate that we have passed. There are a few at this point that I expect we will hear from. After that, we will see what, if anything, needs to go to the conference. And those will be acted on by the House in the month of June. So with that, if there is any further business that anybody wants to bring before the committee, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, everybody, for participating this morning. Enjoy the rest of what's proving to be one of our warmer, nicer days. Thank you.